did our best, but time to mail it in. Let the fun begin. No more committee chairs.
Magic.
Spares. Calculating.
Conspirators.
We are almost there. Time to let down your hair. 'Cause baby, it is summer break. 90 days without.
Summer break. Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Doof Network, where we reflect on Wildbow's most recreational work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are back to talk about two? Hold on, Elliot.
No.
Wait, what's this? There's a third chapter this week? Yes, two regular chapters and then a third ghost chapter. Is it bonus content? Is it a chapter? Who knows?
Yeah, it's a very fun mystery Wildbow sort of dropped on our lap here. Because I saw at the start of the week, he was talking about, he originally wanted to get an extra chapter out like on Monday or Tuesday American time. I get confused about the days because they're different to the days we like. For me, Pale is Wednesdays and Sundays.
Yeah.
Anyway, but he was going to try and get one out at the start of the week, but I think there's been like a bunch of shit just in real life kind of, making it so stuff like that couldn't happen. So it would have been really cool because if he'd done that, it would have been like the deadline would have happened on August 31st in real life.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Which would have been like really fun. But like this is just as good. Like this was better as well because like seeing him talk about that, saying it wasn't going to happen, I would like let my guard down,
And that's when he gets you, isn't it?
Yep.
Yes. So yeah, we will be talking about all three of this week's chapters. But let's start.
Sorry, just fun fact for you, Ruben. These three chapters are as large a word count as one of the arcs in Pact.
Ooh,
that's why it feels like there was so much to do. It's because like, yeah, this would have been a whole arc in our last show.
Yeah. To peek behind the curtain, this is, I think, our longest notes document that we've had for an episode, right?
It's got to be right up there, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we'll see how long this episode goes, but we're about 3 minutes in and we haven't even started. So
sorry, yeah.
Already we're off to do a bad start or a good start, depending on whether you like, 3-hour-long episodes.
Okay. I'll start moving through real quick.
Right.
All packed up too. That's happening.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Coming soon. Very excited for it.
Yep. To this week's segment is Alpiana presents Super Night Mario Maker.
That's such a wonderful title. So what does that mean, Elliot? We're going to be playing Mario Maker. Are there going to be like themes to the levels that we make?
Yeah, I've actually gotten started on a series of path related levels. So a few of the paths that have shown up in the story, I have started making Mario Maker levels on those. They're not good yet, but hopefully they will be in a couple of months.
Is there a promenade related one?
No. I thought we were saving that.
Oh, that's true. Sorry, I forgot about that. Yes. Well, yeah, it's going to be a fun time. I really liked I remember in All Packed Up we did the Guess the Arc. Yeah. Levels, which I found very fun. Maybe I'll make some more Guess the Arc levels because those were quite fun.
Yeah, those were great. My levels were a huge disappointment last time, so I think I've started early because I'm coming back to prove that I'm not that terrible at the game. But yeah, your Guess the Arc ones last time were great. I'd love to play more of those.
Yeah, all right. Well, maybe I'll make some more of those. That could be fun. Anywho, shall we 5 minutes in start talking about these chapters? So yeah, we're about 4 lines into our notes doc on the first page. All right, here we go. The other reason why we have a lot of notes on these chapters really is, I mean, the story is fucking aces at the moment. It's firing on all cylinders, right? I guess we'll talk about that more as we get into it. First chapter we're talking about today, 13.8, Rin Verona's head. The gang Verona asks the gang to leverage their knowledge of movies to try and predict what's going to happen next in the story, which I think is wonderful. I think it's funny that their first point is Charles. They talk about 3 points. It's Charles, Ken, and the Furs, right? And Charles is the one where they're like, yeah, we did this one. It's paid off. we've locked Charles up. He's out of the way. And then they're like, we're not doing so hot on the other two, but at least we've got that first one. And then obviously, break one happens. So I think it's funny that that's the one that that's what they're using to kind of console themselves. And then, this week's set of chapters ends with Charles getting away.
Yeah, I mean, that's fairy shit, right? Like this is fairy 101. If you've got 10 things you need to worry about, and you're like, well, at least I've got this one handled.
Yeah, at least one
if
of
you're
them
fighting a fairy, that's the one you do not have handled.
Yeah.
And I mean, wait, that's the thing. We've sort of talked about. Obviously, I'm still kind of riding the theory that Marisica will get people to vote to put Charles. So to get Charles to put the furs on. Obviously, originally part of that theory was that they would vote to go get him from Ray. That part's a little redundant now, but I guess that's sort of the thing is when you're fighting Marisica like this, and Verona's going to bring it up later. Having something secure isn't secure because she could just find a way to make you give it up.
Yeah. Yeah, we still really, we really don't know a lot about what Marisica has going on at all, do we?
No, we'll talk about this a lot in Break 1, but Liz doesn't even seemingly show up in Break 1.
Which is worrying. So, where is Liz right now?
Yeah, and then you've also got I suppose Break 1 is kind of proof of just how insane Wildbow / the Fairy are at these plots, which is kind of hyping us up for when we're going to get to see what she's got planned in the place she's actually had years to seed her, fucking Rube Goldberg machines.
Yeah, well, I guess we shouldn't. I just want to correct myself because I know we'll probably get tweets or something about it. We do actually probably have a pretty good idea of where Liz is at this point in the story. There's a pretty obvious group that she is infiltrating, which is the stack of others in a trench coat that is one of Muss's familiars. Obviously, there's only meant to be 3 of them, as we know, but Liz is secretly the 4th one that's hiding in the stack, waiting to jump out of the trench coat and make a big moment.
If I could just be real fun at parties for a sec, I think we went over this with Snowdrop's Tiny Fan. She can't do others.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
My current theory is we've heard that the witch hunters are waiting for backup. I just think it'd be so fucking funny if a bunch of new witch hunters showed up and one of them was Liz.
I mean, for all we know, they could be Liz, Marisica, other Fae.
Yeah, true.
You would hope that. Well, actually, now that what's his face,
Harris isn't going to sniff her
that's
out.
the one who would have really easily sniffed him out. Anyway, to go back to the actual chapter, I do really like this strategy that Verona pulls out of comparing it to a movie because it's the Otherverse, and also especially the fact that the big bad is a Fae. It's a very fun way of trying to think about if this was a story, what would the next moves be, and that theoretically kind of is proven correct by the fact that Charles is kind of broken out of prison, right?
Yeah. This is one of those moments where you sort of get reminded how just naturally really good at the practice Verona is, because she's not even consciously making that link that you're making where it's oh, this is the Otherverse and you're fighting a fairy, especially of course you want to compare it to a story and see what story is being told, because that's how this world operates. It's how fairy operate. But Verona isn't even thinking like that. It's just naturally her thought is to go, maybe a better way to map this to find a new hook is to just pretend it's a story. That she just naturally goes for what I think is probably the best framing device you could have for this.
Yeah, and she hits on a really clever point with it as well, which is that it will allow them to break their kind of labels and preconceived notions of who some of these characters are, which is very clever, very, very clever stuff. The kind of stuff that somebody who's falling behind wouldn't think of, and we'll get to that later.
Yeah, well, especially because I think the really one key piece of info we have that the Kennetiers don't at this stage is that we know Marisica is trying to escape being a fairy.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those moments where Verona's I think we just need to try and avoid the labels that we're sticking onto them, and it's oh fuck, Verona, you're so close. It's right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, like for a lot of reasons, this is just really clever, and it just goes to show sort of how naturally great at this stuff Verona can be. Um, and like she goes to talk with the other two as well about what kind of power Jabba can provide, and I thought this was like a really interesting point because there's been talk about him being a battery, um, but now they're sort of actually like bringing up the point, which is in the other verse, there are very different kinds of power, and what sort of power would Jabba actually give you if you tried to use him like a battery? Is actually a really good question.
Yeah, I don't know.
Also, I went back and read his intro, like, or the email Matt sent us to introduce him in like New Others #2, back in Arc 8, and I hadn't read that, since we covered it, and there were a bunch of crazy details that jumped out to me. One of the ones is that Matt notes no one's really sure how. They guess he's just got lucky or something. He's avoided witch hunters and practitioners for years. And I was like, okay,
Seems
well, that
pretty
fucking
sus now,
stinks
doesn't
of
it?
very bullshit. Like, we were trying to figure out who Marisica. What did Marisica say in the visions? It was like 2 people will be brought in and 1 will be led here. And I feel like this is the case for
The
Jabba
one being
probably
led.
being the led to
Yeah.
person. He could be just in on it. I don't know, but yeah. The other thing that really jumped out to me. So Jabba was created as part of a set, is what Matthew said. So there were 3 dolls. One stirs feelings up, the other one collects them, and then the third one would like recycle them into a different kind of energy. And that seemed weird to me because I was like, I'm pretty sure Jabba does 2 of those 3 things.
Does he stir up feelings? I guess he makes people laugh, which is kind
Yeah.
of stirring up feelings.
And then the other thing Matt sort of says is that like the alchemist who made Jabba, like, his enemies caught up with him and the dolls were smashed, but Jabba escaped. And so I'm like, okay, like was Jabba just not completely smashed, or like is he a combination of 2 of those dolls? If that in that case, where's the third? I don't know. I maybe have tinfoiled this out. Like these are details from fucking months ago now.
I mean, it's all useful things to think about. They
Yeah,
definitely
like
still have a bit of a yeah.
I guess just talking about what kind of power he provides. If fucking Charles or Marisica is holding on to the remains of the third doll who can like recycle what he's holding, that'd be important. But in terms of what power he has in him, it seems to be like, that kind of delirious happiness energy. Like that's what he absorbs. I assume, unless it's being changed inside of him. Yeah, he kind of has that delirious happiness that he eats. I don't know how Marisica uses that, but I don't imagine it's pretty.
Yeah, delirium is rarely something pretty, so it doesn't seem like it would be nice. So yeah, then we get a bit of a conflict, I guess, where Verona kind of is musing about, what if we just step in and bind Jabba and banish Ken temporarily without asking for permission? Like, this is such an interesting conversation because I really feel like this would work, or work in the sense of fucking up Marisica's plans, but also it's and that's why it's so alluring, but also it's kind of clearly evil. Like I fully understand all sides of this argument, which is why it's such a juicy one.
Yeah, and we'll get to another one of those in break, but like like these are my favorite things in stories like this is where like I completely agree with Verona and I also completely agree with Lucy and I don't know what I'd want to do because and I mean I get like this is a theme in a lot of stories and I think arguably in every of Wildbow's stories in particular, like is it better to lose well or to win poorly? Like I think Verona's argument that they're better off stopping Marisica even if they have to do some bad things is a super valid point. But then, like Lucy thinking much larger picture and, bringing up some valid historical comparisons is also very right in saying that it's just not a good way to do things. And it particularly talks to what Lucy has been struggling with this whole being the knife versus the smoke. So like, it's obviously great to sort of see as the story is rounding out, the character arcs are colliding with the major conflicts. Like that's what you want a story to do. That's good writing. And I just like I'm sitting here and it's like I don't. I mean, obviously the nice solution would be they just figure out a way to win that doesn't compromise.
Yeah, just
the morals.
But even that's like in a way, leading them to have false hope that there's a perfect solution to a complex problem, right? Like, problems this complex don't have perfect solutions. They have different solutions at different levels of things that you can accept, and you just have to decide what you're willing to accept, right?
Yeah. I think, I kind of agree. I think with this being such an important discussion here and so integral to Lucy's whole sort of character arc right now, I don't see them getting that clean, perfect win in any way, shape, or form. I feel like they're going to have to compromise somehow. And it's going to be super interesting to see, where Lucy in particular is willing to draw that line.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think one argument that gets made that I think is super true is like Verona's idea is arguably a very slippery slope to her becoming an Alexander type. And I mean, obviously that's been a concern for her for a long while now. And I don't know. I really like that argument. It's like if you start crossing those lines, I mean, that's presumably how a lot of these people started. But then again, Lucy's way is arguably just a direct slope to losing. So is that better? Yeah, it's such a fun. I don't have a side in this. I just enjoy both arguments. I can't wait to see where they go.
Yes.
It's also worth pointing out throughout this whole section just what a woeful job Verona is doing, like trying to repress her anxiety about her meeting with her dad. She has so many intrusive thoughts about her dad coming up in all these situations. I almost feel like part of her need to abstract all this stuff to movies and things is because she needs to keep taking steps away from real life. And ironically, fighting magical fairy is too real, so she can bring that back to her dad. But yeah, I guess I just really like this because obviously everyone knows this is the chapter that's going to have the meeting with Brett, and you're kind of bracing yourself for that. So even amongst all this conspiracy talk and planning and arguments between Lucy and Verona about the way to do things, we are just still getting prodded with like, hey, don't let your own anxiety about the meeting with Brett go away. That is coming. It sort of helps you live in Verona's head a bit that Walbo keeps poking you with, don't get into this. Brett's coming.
Yeah, it really is like hanging over, a cloud hanging over the chapter, right?
Yeah. And I think like that's great. Like we've talked about with some of the Lucy things as well, because it was upsetting to me every time she kept going back to Brett. I was like, oh, don't remind me about Brett. And like the amount that I'm feeling that would be like a tiny fraction of what it is for Verona as well.
Yeah.
And like so I love it when books sort of do that. They get you to feel a feeling, but then also as you're feeling it, you're like, man, they must be feeling this 100 times.
Yeah. So yeah, this conversation gets more and more heated until Avery steps in to try and diffuse the tension a bit. Well done, Avery.
Yeah, fucking Avery makes a pretty strong case for mediation as a way forward for the world here. Or I mean, she also just makes a really good case for why Miss needed to pick 3 people and not 2.
Yep.
Yeah. Also, actually, I guess not 3 but 4 because this new genius mediator we've got also has her own form of ethical justice in the form of opossum bites.
Comes with a nice deterrent in the form of Snowdrop. Yeah, I really loved this whole early section of this chapter because it is just 3 people who are all very much correct in their own ways and yet butting heads, and it's just so juicy.
Yeah. Although, like, Avery is very much trying to act as a bit of a mediator. But I do love that the way she almost starts that off is by she just sort of stands up and is like, "Hey, you guys are leaving me behind. Wait a minute. Like, I need to take charge for a bit," because that was like early story Avery would not have been able to do that.
Yeah, definitely a growth moment.
Yeah. I guess I'll save most of the Avery growth talk for next chapter, but yeah, like you sort of need, I think, someone like Avery to step in here because, like as we said above, Verona and Lucy are both making very valid arguments. Like I can't really fault one or the other, but they're also both kind of very bad at listening to the other or like making that compromise, meeting in the middle. Like Lucy is sort of unwilling to even entertain the idea of like doing one of these bad things as a starting point, and Verona is kind of unwilling to not use them at least as a starting point or discuss them as backup plans. And I love that you then sort of get to have someone like Avery, who I think is a bit better than these other two at understanding where other people are coming from. Like she's our people person. She's the person who could sort of try to understand why someone thinks the way they do. And she sort of uses that to help bridge the gap between them a little bit. And within about a minute, they're no longer talking about this argument they're having. They're talking about the actual argument that they've been having for a while now, which is that Verona wants to be left alone to try and live her life, and Lucy's concerned that she doesn't know what she's doing with it. So yeah, it's just great to see Avery kind of step up here.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get into the core of Verona's frustrations here, which have kind of been boiling up. Basically, there's a conflict of her feeling like she's at the same time falling behind, but also being held back, I guess, or like not trusted when she's trying to be active and gung ho.
Yeah, it almost feels like she basically feels like interactions with other people have two modes. Either they're controlling her too much and kind of like, making sure she doesn't do stuff, or they're telling her what to do. Like she doesn't ever feel like she has that ability to decide things for herself. In her head, it's either don't do this or do this.
But I do think the fact that she, in her mind, falling behind is such a strong one, and we've had it. She obviously it comes up this chapter again, and then she's thinking about a domain to kind of mirror Lucy's implement. Avery's familiar, like
it's been an insecurity of hers for a good while now. Yeah,
yeah, but I mean, like it's pretty clearly wrong, right? I mean, I remember the last chapter with Verona we had was she was still gainsaid, and she fended off 2 witch hunters, one of who Avery couldn't deal with John's help. Like, I don't know. In the sense of her as a practitioner, in no way do I feel like Verona is falling behind. In fact, I would say she's, in terms of power, probably ahead of Lucy and Avery, right?
I mean, I feel like that is just not a comparison with, but like it's different flavors. Like we're just talking about the different types of power in this universe. It's like I think this is the problem, is that Verona's thinking about it in terms of more and less power and not just different kinds.
Yeah, I was kind of mulling this over and reflecting on it after I'd gone through the next chapter again, and it kind of occurred to me that, Avery especially, but also Lucy, their goal isn't to be necessarily a better practitioner, right? They have goals that they are chasing. Lucy's justice, Avery's, friendships and connections. And that is incidentally, or kind of as a secondary effect, making them quite good practitioners, right? We see that a lot with how Avery does next chapter. She does exceptionally well, but it's because she's chasing the goal of building connections. Whereas to me, the aspect in which Verona is falling behind perhaps is that she seems to be chasing being a practitioner for its own sake, or for the sake of, disconnecting a bit from her human life, which is, I don't know. So maybe that's why she's feeling like that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think there's something to that. She is the one who's kind of chasing power more than the other two. I mean, that leads into those Alexander-y tendencies she has that we were just talking about. And yeah, like I suppose the thing is, in a world like this with so many different flavors of power, you're always going to be able to sort of look at Lucy and Avery through a certain lens and think, oh, they're more powerful than me because they'll be better in certain ways.
I maybe I'm going to be slightly overly harsh on Verona here, but the fact that she can find justifications for how she is falling behind is a worrying trait, right? Alexander-ish is correct, right? It's the ability to justify, like, oh, I need to do this thing because otherwise I'm going to fall behind, and that's going to lead to all these bad results. Like, it feels like it doesn't feel like she's there yet, but I can definitely see the path from Verona getting to. I mean, we hear hints of it in the early part of this chapter. You can see the parts of her hinting at how far she might be willing to go to pursue her goals, with the mindset still being, I'm falling behind, and potentially even a bit of a like victim-y mindset. I don't know.
Yeah,
Is that overly? Do you think that's unfair?
No, I mean, this is what Jess Watch is all about.
Mm.
Like this is Jess's basic exact concern with her, and I think there's something to it. I think what's interesting though is with Alexander, I think his power lust just came from, well, it was just power lust, right? Like he just wanted to be in control. Like he enjoyed people working together, but he needed to be on top. Whereas Verona's is coming from a place of just like she's had this lack of control. Like that's what her whole rant here sort of devolves into. Like she pivots from, I'm falling behind to basically saying, oh, you're either telling me what to do or you're telling me what not to do. I never have any freedom. And it's because like, her home life has completely fucked up her relationship with the idea of control, and like power is control in a way, right? Like if she's got more power, she's going to have more control over what she can and can't do. So
Yeah.
I see it as being, yeah, like an instinct that's kind of interwoven with the shit that's going on in her life to do with her dad, because and it's all tying together a bit. Like it's the same with this whole thing with like her inability to sort of work on a team. Like when we saw her get rescued, you already brought this up. When she got rescued, it was sort of like, oh, I've failed. You they needed to come rescue me, and it's like that insecurity or that like need to be helped is coming from like she doesn't want to need to be helped because her dad kind of taught her that that's really bad. So this like insecurity around power, and also her kind of insecurity around being an effective member of a team, like taking any and all potential criticism extremely personally as she's doing. Like it's all coming back to basically the way her dad fucked her up and her mum. Let's not give Sylvia no credit. She did a number. But yeah, I don't know. For me, like this feels like what it's going to have to come back to for Verona is she needs to find a way to be able to work with like even Lucy and Avery in a way that's not like defined in terms of control and power to herself, because I mean, that's what's causing her this mental block and causing her to have such a short fuse with like Lucy prodding about stuff and whatever. Yeah. I mean, like just on all the stuff about like her seeing getting help as a personal failure, it's worth pointing out that is absolutely a double standard she holds only to herself. If she needs to go and help her friends, she doesn't even question it. She's like, "Oh, Lucy needs my help. I'd better do that. That's what a good friend does." If Lucy then returns the favor, Verona is like, "I have failed. I am a failure." Like it's a standard she's only holding herself to, and that's like almost part of the problem.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know I've brought this up a few times, but I still feel like Lucy is of the Kennetiers, the one that I can see the most easily taking the Carmine furs.
Sorry, Lucy or Verona?
Sorry, Verona is what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to admit, I still don't really agree on the furs thing, especially after her trip into them. But I do agree that sort of, I think from early arc 1, Verona's been the one where you're sort of like, oh, if anyone is sort of in the mental space to do something drastic and stupid, it's Verona. And that's still probably a feeling I have. She's comforted me in that regard in a lot of ways. Like, she's proven that she won't do stupid things at the drop of a hat, but she's still the one who's clearly struggling the most with all these issues about control and dealing with the future, and that's never a good sign.
Yeah, definitely.
And I did want to call out, there's this one bit where Avery sort of steps up and takes the lead, and she's like, you guys are better at this than me, and this is where Lucy comes in with, that you're crazy good at a lot of stuff we aren't good at, right? And Avery's like, I know, I think, maybe.
Classic.
Sure. And I was just like, fuck, that's all three of these idiots in a nutshell. It's like,
yeah.
Like, all of them would be like, oh no, you're good at things I'm not. But when they get that sent back at them, it's like, oh, no.
Yeah, there's a lot of classic Kennetier stuff in these chapters for sure.
Yeah. To focus on the positive classic Kennetier stuff,
yes.
Verona slams the door as she's leaving, but then does pop her head back in to quickly remind them that like she still really loves them. Like I think Verona and Lucy have been pretty clear throughout this whole argument that it won't affect their friendship at large. I think like details like this are super important for that. Like I remember reading a lot of stuff about relationships. Like if you have a fight with a partner, as one of you's leaving or like going to bed, it's important to like still do things like this, like say that you love them before you separate or whatever, because you do, like you're just fighting now, and it's important to remember that while between the fight, I guess.
Yeah. I do think it's nice. I mean, I think Verona has a lot of justified frustration here at Lucy, but it is very nice that Verona takes some active steps here to, it's not make sure they're not burning any bridges in their friendship, I guess. I'm a little nervous that Lucy doesn't have any overt gestures of similar things, but we'll see.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because like I thought Lucy did incredibly well here. Like she has that moment where she apologizes to Verona, using the talk she had with John and we learn with Dr. Mona, and like even I think Verona's response to that is like she still wanted to be mad but didn't feel like she could, which means it was probably a very good apology. Um, but then later on, like Verona does sort of go back to biting Lucy's head off a bit, and it's just like, Lucy dug her heels in a bit with this whole "we can't consider the bad plans" thing. But I do think Verona shows here like her side of their conflict a bit more, which is like Verona is she's carrying these other issues of stuff around her dad, and it's causing her to have an extra short fuse on other things. And so like Lucy doesn't even have to do that much wrong for Verona to kind of go over the top and shut it down. So I thought like overall I was kind of thinking Lucy was behaving pretty reasonably and trying, and Verona like still kind of it was taking the least charitable reads that she could in a bit of an unfair way. That I understand why she's doing that, but yeah.
So yeah, I guess moving on, Verona leaves this situation and goes off to meet with Jeremy, and they have a very nice, relaxing hangout. It's lovely.
It's very nice. I needed this, not as much as Verona, but I needed this to prepare me for the end of the chapter. I wanted to open though, calling out this moment where when Jeremy first arrives, she there's a whole paragraph basically explaining how rather than get up and move her towel, she like moves herself and the towel along the ground inch by inch, in a way that she describes as agonizing and inefficient, that took about 10 times as long as just standing up would have. And I just had to call this out because this is 100% how I live my life as well, and I think it's a great metaphor for the way Verona is like making her life harder with some of these things by not ripping the band-aid off, so to speak, by just standing up and moving the towel. It's like you try to just take the easy way out, like a bit at a time, and it ends up making things so much harder in the long run. Like it's it's a bit what Lucy was talking about in a way. I know that's a bit of a reach, but it just stood out to me because I do this shit all the time.
Yeah, I can relate for sure. But yeah, I mean, this is just it's just nice. Like, you can really feel that without some of these interactions like this, Verona would just explode, right? Yeah.
I like this is Jeremy is a super valuable like escape for her, basically like a break. And it's actually discussed towards the end of this chapter, because there's a really funny moment where Verona sort of explains that Jeremy and also Tash and Peckersnot are kind of her retreats, and Lucy takes it a little bit personally that she's not one, but we've seen Lucy use Booker and Jasmine as exactly this same thing to get away from Verona and Avery for a bit. So like, I was a bit like, come on, Lucy, like you have the same thing. You have to see that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it makes sense. Sometimes you need that person who isn't involved and who can't be and won't fully understand it, just so you can kind of talk at them about this stuff and get it out of your system in a way that doesn't have to involve someone involved, because then there's an extra layer of shit to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, that was how our last Verona chapter ended as well, right? With her sitting with with them.
Yeah, you're right. It's almost the same thing. She wants someone who kind of gets it, but like doesn't isn't involved enough to have to do anything about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just people that are just yeah. I don't know. I mean, on one hand, it's slightly worrying that you can't bring it up to Lucy, right, or Jasmine, or Avery, or whoever. But I think it's normal.
Yeah, yeah, like it's the same way. Like people will complain to partners about like shit going on at work, right? Like, I remember when my ex would come home and complain about work. It was like I think part of the value I offered there is because I wasn't involved in any way, shape, or form, or like wasn't in a position to fix it. Like all I could do is really just like listen, and I think sometimes that's what you need.
Yeah, you're actually unable to help in that situation, and that's kind
Yeah.
of it. There's no.
And
Yeah, I get what you
understand
mean.
or question the intricacies. Like she doesn't want someone
Yeah.
who, will, try to fully understand the situation, I guess. She just needs someone to hear her side.
Mm.
And that makes a lot of sense. Um, and I mean, speaking of, like, it's worth pointing out again, like, that Jeremy just continues to, like, knock it out of the park. I just find myself thinking what we need to do in universe, like, forget all this other, stopping practitioners and all that unimportant systemic change. We need to figure out what the parents in Canada are doing to raise boys like Jeremy and Wallace.
Mm.
And if we can make that replicatable, like the world will be a much better place if everyone's being raised like Jeremy and Wallace.
Yeah, yeah, they're pretty great, aren't they? I
Yeah,
mean, Jeremy is obviously great in this chapter.
if the men of the world were like Jeremy and Wallace, a lot of problems would pretty instantly start to get better.
Mm.
And Verona also checks in with Jeremy again here
Yeah,
about whether she's taking advantage of him, which I thought was like a really good sign for the two of them. Like obviously the stuff with Lucy didn't go smoothly. That's been talked to death, but I do feel like it's important that sort of at the end of the day, Verona has sort of realized that there is potential that she could hurt him if those boundaries aren't very set in stone, and the two of them are definitely a lot better now at having healthy conversations about where those boundaries lie. Um, like if you compare this to how they talk about it in 8.8 when Verona brought him home for the first time, it's night and day.
yeah, definitely. She clearly. I mean, yeah. Obviously, her frustrations with Lucy are justified, but there's clearly some learnings from it that she has taken to heart in a good way, which is nice.
Well, I mean, it's kind of similar to their argument before, right? Like Lucy was, bullheaded or whatever, sure, but like there was a point in amongst her things that Verona was kind of, digging her heels in, not really acknowledging. It was kind of an immovable object, sorry, an unstoppable force meets an immovable object in a way. Like, I felt like they both didn't handle that very well, and it was just really nice to see that, yeah, like as Lucy earlier in the chapter is acknowledging I fucked up and was, wrong about some of the stuff with Jeremy. It's also good that Verona has taken the lesson I think she needed to, which is making sure that she is considering Jeremy and, hopefully she will. Well, yeah, I guess they're both still battling with the bullheadedness and the kind of inability to let others help. But in this specific circumstance, they've both realized what they did wrong. Um, and I think another important distinction for Jeremy here is that he seems more confident to lay down his boundaries. Like in 8.8, there was very much
Yeah,
a vibe of Verona would just say something to Jeremy like, shit, yeah, sure. Like she
yeah,
very much had control. Whereas like here, Jeremy actually takes that moment to just be like, hey, just like checking. Like they basically agree to be monogamous essentially.
mm.
And it's because like Jeremy prompts that and says that's probably important to him. And Verona's like, yeah, I yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, there's um. Well, I guess we'll get to the other stuff in a little bit too.
Yeah, but like that's just a huge leap in, yeah, like the sort of ability for both of them to have healthy conversations around this stuff.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, it's worth pointing out. Verona even thinks about where, like in a few, she's like, you might leave me in a few years, like whatever. And I was just like, holy shit, Verona thinking about things in a few years and not panicking. Like this thing with Jeremy is really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, the other thing to really talk about here is like, I really want to shout out. There was a great series of discussions on our Discord about like aromanticism and stuff. I particularly want to shout out Sleeping Beluga, who shared like a lot of like really like useful resources for understanding this stuff. Because a question I raised during my live read was, if Jeremy and Verona have like essentially agreed to be monogamous and they're friends, and there's obviously a physical side to their relationship, to me, I was like, isn't that just dating? Like, in the very like classical sense, like how is it, like Verona makes a very clear point of, I don't want to be dating Jeremy, and I was like,
Mm.
but you keep hanging out with him. There's physical stuff, and you get along. Like, what's the difference?
Mm.
And
And you're
yeah,
monogamous.
Sorry.
And you're monogamous, which obviously is not a marker of it, but is a very
Yeah.
traditional marker of dating.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's not a requirement, but I like, to me, the idea that you'd agree to be monogamous would sort of suggest something closer to classical dating. Yeah.
Mm.
Anyway, yeah, but so just like having a bunch of people on our Discord, like particularly a bunch of aromantic people weigh in, it was just really like great to sort of learn this stuff from, because that just, to me, I like, at first I was like, I don't understand the difference, and I think I do now. Like, a certain degree of it boils down to the label coming with like responsibilities and expectations. Like, there is a certain thing, if you were dating, even if that's tied to actually having to go out on dates, which I think Verona and Jeremy could get around. Like, speaking from myself, I've never been in a relationship that involved actually going out on dates that much. I've tended to find other recluses, and we date by hanging out together at home. But like, yeah, I guess the ideas of like, potentially thinking about moving in the future or whatever. So like, the labels are a part of it, but particularly Sleeping Beluga's stuff. They introduced this whole thing called like the split model of attraction, which I found super useful, and a bunch of stuff about like, they're like all these websites that were sort of like questions on like, depending on your answers to these questions, you might be aromantic. And even though, uh, like, even if you're not aromantic, still like a very useful exercise to go through and ask yourself a lot of these questions that you may just like not have ever considered because of the way society is built to just sort of treat a lot of this stuff as default.
Yes, 100%.
Like, the similar ones used to get shared on our Discord way back in the day a lot more on like, it was the same sort of deal with like trans stuff. So like, if you've experienced this, or if answered these questions or whatever, and like, that might hint that maybe there's something up with your gender. And obviously, like, I've still landed on being cis / mostly cis myself, but like, it was an extremely useful exercise to like just encounter these questions and be like, I'd never thought about that. That's a good point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a benefit of the world we live in and the circles that you and I kind of run in, especially online, that these kinds of, in the past less visible, diverse experiences are more to the front, that allow people to kind of question their own identities and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think it's a useful exercise, even if you still end up being cis, or I learnt the term allo-romantic, which is someone who's classically romantically inclined. Like, it's still useful to question this stuff. It teaches you more about yourself. Like, the split model of attraction that Beluga shared.
Yeah.
One thing that jumped out to me, there were sort of these 5 aspects of attraction, and they all kind of mapped. I think we've talked on this podcast before about the 5 love languages. And honestly, like, part of me was reading the split model of attraction. I was thinking, did the person who wrote the 5 love languages just take this model and rebrand it into their own thing and turn it into a book? Because each of the love languages lines up pretty closely with one of the like aspects of attraction.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, just a shout out to those people in our Discord and the resources that are there. Like, people should come and look at them. It was very enlightening for me. Like, I learned a lot, and it's just a good process to go through.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting stuff for sure. And this is the strength of well written and diverse stories, is that they allow you to have much more interesting reflections, both introspective and kind of external, on yourself and the characters.
Yeah, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I was pretty unfamiliar with the concept of aromanticism before starting this story, and the fact that it led to conversations like that led me to getting some education on it is,
it's
I mean
cool.
that's really awesome.
Yeah, it's not just about hitting big monsters with sticks, Elliot. There's things in these stories to make you think.
But you get both. That's the beauty.
You get both. That's the joy. Yeah.
We also get to see Avery hit big monsters with sticks.
Yeah.
So yeah. Also, just one last thing about this discussion. It was very pleasing because I feel like the thing that came up halfway through the discussion was I was like, what exactly is like romantic feelings? And I was very glad that a bunch of other people were like, that's a very good question, because it was like, oh, okay. It's a little bit ineffable to some degree.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, when you start questioning these things, you see how quickly society, painting things as default has allowed you to exist without really questioning what actually they are.
Yeah, like that's a really good example of how like going through those questionnaires that people like Beluga were posting made me sit back and go, what is a romance? Like,
everyone knows what romance is, Elliot. It's buying wine and cheese for your lady friend and then running to the airport for a woman, it's running to the airport before their man gets on a plane. And that's it. That's the only definitions of romance.
Yeah, that's why romance can't happen on sunny days, because if you're not running to the airport in the rain, it doesn't count.
Oh, sorry, yeah, kissing in the rain is the third allowable type of romance as per Hollywood standards. Yeah. To be clear, that was a joke. Yeah, I do not believe that.
Yeah, we're obviously joking.
I just want to make that explicitly clear.
Yeah.
Anywho, so yeah, then the next thing that happens here is Verona. I mean, as we kind of talked about, Verona is opening up to Jeremy about her feelings and fears about the meeting with her dad, which is especially important because as she kind of mentions and thinks about, like, she kind of is locked into a situation of not being able to talk about that with the people that she explicitly should be able to, e.g. Child Protective Services, by virtue of the fact that if she does talk about it, it will mess up many other aspects of her life, which is pretty tragic.
Yeah, and we'll get more into her plan and how she's tackling that when we see it in action with her dad in a sec. But it is worth pointing out again, we've already sort of touched on it obviously, but like Jeremy just is perfect at reacting to her talking about this stuff with her dad, because he can't, like, he brings up, he's like, I don't really know how I'm meant to react to this. I feel like I'm just not reacting. And I was like, Jeremy, that's exactly what you need to be fucking doing. Like, Verona very much wants somebody who won't react, and that's a point she makes very clear. She says it explicitly like 4 times in a row, like, don't let this change how you treat me. And it's like he actually listens, because the very next thing he does is start shit stirring her by threatening to delete cat pictures, which was just like to go from no response to kind of like shit stirring her was just like exactly what Verona wanted. And I was like,
she doesn't want their dynamic to be changed.
Yeah, and yeah, he gets that and just does extremely well with it.
Now, shall I raise a thought here? Verona opens up, Jeremy hugs her, they have some nice moments, and then the very next thing out of her mouth to break this moment, and I think it's explicitly from her to break this moment, is, hey, you want to try boning? And I don't know, like,
she also calls it gobbling her goblin, which was just...
what does she say? Meeting the downstairs neighbors?
Yeah.
Like, she uses some really ridiculous and hilarious slang here. But like, there's 2 reads here, I think. One is that it's concerning that this is where her mind goes after, conversations about the stressful situations in her life, as like a strange, or not strange, but kind of slightly worrying coping mechanism. But the other one is maybe that she's reached a new level of comfort with Jeremy, and this is like the progression of her being, very comfortable and just a bit tactless.
Yeah, to me, it's pretty clear that this isn't like an entirely spur of the moment decision, because she mentions she's got protection.
Yes,
and fuck, it feels weird talking about this. I just say that. I think in general, I don't really have a problem with these two exploring that space. They seem to be in a really good spot right now. Like, whatever. It's just something I don't really want to think about too much. If I'm being
Sure,
honest,
yes.
it's like Lucy said when the Carmine Beast started to do it. It's just kind of like we can just pull the curtains
Yep.
closed for that
Fast
part of the
forward
story
there.
for me.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fade to
But I
black.
do think I do think Jeremy clocks it perfectly that like this is something that Verona's thought about, and it's something they're both obviously interested in. But the way Verona brings it up right here is very clearly like, as you said, this is that classic Verona move of things are getting a little bit awkward. I'm going to drop a verbal nuke on the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side of it is that, yeah, she's wanting to use it as a distraction from the stuff that's going to happen later in the day, which is also just not a great tone to set for the whole thing.
I mean, yeah, good work. Jeremy definitely makes the right move, shutting it down.
Yeah, but like temporarily, like he's just like, this is not the time to do this, but like, let's keep this conversation open, which I feel like was the correct response for where the two of them are right now.
Yeah. It was very hilarious. At one point when Verona was propositioning him, she gave him finger guns, which is just classic Verona. It's wonderful stuff.
Well, it's like finger guns have become her code for like, I'm deflecting emotionally.
I mean, I think that's always what finger guns are, and they're
fair.
Just wonderful. They're
I
a
think it's
real
also
wonderful human invention.
Yeah, but I think the finger guns here also serve a very clever secondary purpose for Verona. Because if Jeremy is still interested in this idea after she's done finger guns in this situation, it's clearly like she's got him on the hook. You know,
I like that. Yeah, it's a way of
he's not going anywhere. If she can say could be a sucky day with high points and then give him finger guns and he's still interested,
yeah,
like it's a safe bet.
It's a real check if he still wants me when I'm at my worst moment.
Yeah, you can't handle me at my worst.
So yeah, Verona heads off to see her dad again and expects nothing to have changed. And yeah, I mean, there he is. There's the boy, Brett. Whoop whoop! Welcome back, buddy.
Yeah, haven't we all missed this? Everyone's excited. Brett's back in the story, right?
Yeah. I want to, because like, I want us to remember back to when Brett was an active part of this story, at the very start of this story, when I think our reaction to him really was like, oh, well, something's up here, but it doesn't seem like, it seems like it's only like one conversation away from things being okay, right? And that was how it felt for a while, and that's why it was so insidious, right? Like,
yeah, the subtlety of his abuse kind of sneaks up on you, and it's been, obviously they've been talking about it recently on like our mum critiques Wildbow, like Jenny and Malia's show with their mum. Like, I think when they did the first half of Arc 1, their mum was a bit like, he's not doing great, but like, maybe it was just a rough day.
Exactly.
And then by the end of Arc 1, she's like, I don't really like him. And then she came back in the most recent one, like at the first half of Arc 2, and she's like, fuck this guy.
Yeah, and that's what it's like. Like
yeah.
So that's the thing to keep in mind during this conversation, right? Is the classic Brett move is for us to read it and think, okay, I mean, like, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't good, but he could, but maybe it's going in the right direction, kind of vibes. And that's almost what this conversation feels like, except for there's this one moment where the mask slips, and it's so telling, because Brett is like apologetic. He's like talking about how he's gone to therapy, blah blah blah, and Verona has correctly learned to let him prove it with deeds rather than words. And then there's the moment of the mask slipping where Brett just weirdly calls Verona out for lying. She calls her a liar for saying that she cooked the most. And then, she kind of pushes back, and he eventually kind of lands on, it's a bit of an exaggeration before they kind of move on. And it's just clearly like old school Brett rearing his head, and it's so gross. Like it makes you feel like you start reading the conversation with Brett, and you, for the first few sentences, you almost let yourself get your hopes up, and then you get to this bit and you feel gross that you slipped into that mindset. That's how I felt reading it.
I think what's really interesting about this bit too is Verona spends a while intentionally pressing his buttons, and I very much get the vibe that Brett is making a conscious effort not to let those buttons get pressed, but it's like this is the one where it's so much more innocuous, right? Like I think the first button Verona explicitly presses is she's like, "Oh yeah, Mum did a great job shopping for me. Like Mum has provided everything I need." And Brett doesn't really react because, especially if you think about it from David, like the cast guy's perspective, if Brett says anything, not overtly positive about Verona's mum helping, like that's a red flag.
Yep.
Him deciding to take his stand on the fact that she didn't cook as much as she's making out, like this is exactly the reason he slips through those cracks that we were talking about and isn't like overtly abusive, but like still kind of is, because this is the one where he can put his foot down and challenge her, and it doesn't really reflect as poorly on him as any of the other buttons she pressed would have. Like this is the one he can get away with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like this is where we need to talk about Verona's plan here, because as you said, she first mentions it with Jeremy a bit before, but basically she has come into this meeting and has more or less decided beforehand that she wants her dad to win, because if she makes the case that she really can't go back there, or if her dad really falls apart and is clearly not a fit parent, then the discussion turns back to her moving in with her mum, presumably.
Yeah.
And like what I love about this, first of all, I was so busy waiting for Brett to let me down that I didn't realize that Wildbow would flip the script and have like the torturousness of this interaction come from Verona's tactic. But it's great because this touches on the argument she just had with Lucy at the start of the chapter. Like this is what ties these two scenes in the chapter together, is that like Verona is going for the compromised win here. She's basically made the decision that she can go stomach going back to the old dynamic because the big changes, like having to move away or whatever, are too complicated, too painful, whatever. Like there isn't a great solution to Verona's problem. Like we don't have that good moral solution at the moment. She can't just move in with Jazz. And so Verona has decided that she wants to stay in Kennet, so she's going to get that compromised win by basically letting her dad get away with it and trying to move back in with him and let him and Cass sweep it under the rug as a past mistake.
Yeah. Which
and
is pretty depressing, right?
Yeah. But like, I can't quite criticize it because on the other hand, I'm like, I don't really have a better plan. Like moving with Jazz has been ruled out. You moving away with your mum, I would argue, is a better solution, but I'm not going to pretend it doesn't have massive problems too, like separating her from Lucy, especially if Avery's leaving as well. Like leaving Lucy here by herself is like that'd be fucked.
It makes me worry more about Avery leaving as well. Like Verona making, I don't know. I worry that Verona's reaction to Avery leaving is not going to be nice, considering that she is making clearly a personal sacrifice for what she sees as kind of keeping the gang together, right?
Verona's the one who I've been worried about learning about this, and I think like seeing stuff like this, it has the potential to flare up. But yeah, I guess it's interesting because like I can't quite fault Verona's strategy, because she pokes and prods her dad to make sure that things aren't going to be noticeably worse. Like her logic of, if he can't even contain himself in this meeting, I shouldn't go back there. That's too bad. Is like a really good fallback to her plan to just let things go back to the way they were. But fuck, her plan of just letting things go back to the way they were is like a really shitty plan, but is arguably the best of the shitty plans she has available. And I hate that. Like, and it's such a good tie into like, I guess what is the sort of theme of the chapter, which is like we're learning Verona is willing to get that compromised win, and I'm interested to see how this goes for her in this case. Especially because, as we talked about, this is something she's not comfortable talking to people like Lucy and stuff about. And like Lucy is the one who stops her taking that compromised win. So like, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah.
It's worth pointing out David, the cast guy, does seem to be aware of what's going on.
Because I mean, he asks Verona to give him enough information to do something different, and she effectively refuses, right?
and he has like a bunch of moments. Like she sort of says, "I just want to move on," and he's like, moving on can mean you're not really handling what happened. I was like, oh fuck, this guy's got Verona pegged.
Yep, got her.
But like also just like these great moments where it's sort of like she's like, "Oh, I don't want to give David the impression that things are too bad for me to move back in there." And then like the next thing she says is like, "How long does this meeting have to go for?" And they ended after like 2 minutes. It was like an hour long. An hour had been set aside, and after about 2 minutes, she's like, "Can I go?" And I was like, "Verona, you're not really selling the whole. This is a home I can stomach going back to."
Yeah, she doesn't even care to pretend. Basically, she's just kind of like. Yeah, I mean, she's talking about how it feels like it's a looming deadline, and she doesn't want to. Basically, that she doesn't want to think about it until she has to go back.
Yeah, and she runs into that classic thing that the Kennedys have been running into a lot recently, which is like, all of the other adults are basically like, you need to spend a night there, or like, we need to practice things, and Verona's like, I don't have time to do that for 3 days. But she can't say that in a way that an adult is actually going to take seriously. Like, there's no way to read Verona saying, I can't stay there for 3 days, or within the next 3 days, as anything but like she's avoiding it. But of course, we know that it's because, there's this fucking fairy-related shitstorm that's going down. But David can't know that. So it's like, just that extra layer of the magic and the home life conflicting in that really fun way that a good story does.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, Verona escapes to the house on Half Street and spends her time researching domains, which is where she is found by Lucy and Avery.
Yeah, because as the personal attacks on my lifestyle continue, Verona decides she isn't quite ready to talk to them yet, so she goes to do some reading, gets completely lost in it, and suddenly she's basically missing.
Yep.
Like, yeah, fuck, yet another attack on how I live my life by Verona chapters.
Yeah, and Verona talks about how she wants a domain because she needs somewhere that she can retreat away from her dad too, basically.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, just another indication of like, it's just not going to work. It's not going to work out there.
Yeah, I mean, her having a domain to escape to while living with her dad, I actually don't think is the worst plan.
I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just clearly like, that means that she's not, I mean, this is kind of obvious from this chapter, I guess, but she's not actually moving back in with her dad in any real sense of the word. She's just kind of hiding out for a few years or whatever until she can, like,
yeah, but
it's not a
the
solution. I don't know.
There's a solid argument that the other alternatives are worse. Like,
yeah, I suppose.
Like, she gets put in foster care or has to go with her mom. Like, I don't think either of those are particularly ideal either. I think the moving in with her mom idea probably should get more weight given to it, but I can see why the Kenneteers don't like it. In particular. I don't know. I mean, like, the idea of Verona getting a domain has been a popular fan theory for a long time because of how well it resonates with her need to have a place to escape to from her dad. I think we've talked about her doing it in the house on Half Street since it first popped up. Like, it makes a lot of sense, and it'll be interesting because if it does still happen, like if this is sort of how her epilogue or whatever goes, like she sets up this domain, it would remind me of like obviously when Snowdrop first appeared, a lot of us are like, well, Avery has to take her as a familiar, right?
Yeah, true.
Wabo like really made them earn it. Like, it didn't happen until Arc 10. It was really like there was a reason for Avery to do it, and they'd been through thick and thin together and like had proven that they were always going to have each other's backs. And it's a bit the same with this domain for me now. Is like, if this is what Verona does at the end of the story, I will be like, it will feel like something she really had to go through to sort of earn it, and it was a decision that was given an appropriate amount of weight. Because I think it's easy to get a bit trigger happy outside of the story with like, Avery, familiar, this opossum you've known for a month as a 13-year-old. Like, that's a dumb plan, but like she had to put in a bit of time to earn it. And I feel kind of the same with Verona taking a domain here now. Like, it's an idea that would have been a bit shotgun before, but I think if this is really the path she's going down, going back with her dad, she does need a place to escape, and I think it actually makes sense now.
Yeah.
But not doing it right now, because we learn that the domain ritual, you basically just challenge everyone in the local area, and not now. It's a bad plan at the moment.
Yeah. But yeah, that's 13.8. Let's get into 13.9. We are now in Avery's head, and we've jumped ahead to Avery bargaining with the Garricks, which is wonderful. She has something they want, but she won't say what it is. It is worth a lot of money, though. God, it's nice to just have a nice... This chapter's just so much fun, right? Like, it's just... well, I mean, the first 2/3 of it or whatever. Just, like, really fun stuff. It's like a oasis of Avery being competent, having some nice fun bargaining, fun magic, like, no shenanigans, just nice fun stuff that goes well.
Yeah, after the emotional onslaught of the Verona chapter, it's kind of a relief to just have this fun one here. I mean, obviously, this is like a sort of a super positive experience of a chapter overall. I feel, but I was quite caught off guard by how Avery is sort of immediately playing hardball. Like, I guess Miss and Toad obviously spent a lot of 13.6 trying to make her do this, but I really did think Avery would sort of give them more to open the doorway before doing this. Like I thought she'd give them hints for free and then charge for the full info, but she really just comes in fucking, oh, you've got to give me 120 grand to get anything, and she holds firm to that price for the whole negotiation. Pushing hard like that would have been particularly tricky for her. It's really impressive that she did it.
Yeah, she does really well.
And obviously it's worth pointing out Jude is here, because obviously he and Avery are best friends. And the reason I want to call them out is because like Jude has this moment where so at the start of the negotiations, Zed and Nicolette are basically trying to vouch for Avery, and Walt and Jude's aunt are sort of challenging that. And Jude sort of pipes in at one point with like, do you think we shouldn't trust Zed and Nicolette? And he basically gets shushed by his aunt. And I was just like, this is another moment where like Jude is really just the Avery of his family. Like, this is such a fucking classic Avery maneuver he's pulled here, which is like, there's the mind games going into the negotiation by everyone else, and Jude just pops up like just asking the honest question. Like, this is exactly the shit we've seen Avery do before, where she just like will tell people information she shouldn't have or whatever, just because she's like, well, wait, aren't we doing this? And she's just like, she and Jude, they just don't play the mind games, and it's really fun. Like, I think on the promenade in Arc 10, we talked about how the two of them were similarly like, the kind of punching bags of their family. Like, Jude was the same as Avery, where everyone was making fun of him and he couldn't really return it. And here we sort of see just another way these two are very similar, in that Jude just doesn't play the mind games. He's just sort of trying to be Avery's friend and be very upfront, and his family is just frustrated with him for not playing the game, and it was adorable. I can't wait to see these two continue to be friends, because like they're very similar in so many ways.
Yeah. They are a good combo, aren't they?
I mean, sorry, like, just as another thing though, it is great as well, because Jude showing us, Jude giving off those big Avery vibes, I think also shows how much Avery has grown by not giving off those same vibes. Like, she is holding her own. Nicolette is definitely helping.
Yeah.
But like Avery is not pulling a Jude in this. And I so in a way that comparison almost actually serves as a contrast, because Avery has managed to treat this as a proper business transaction in a way that Jude currently can't. Also, he uses ums and ahs a lot more than any of the other characters, which jumped out to me, because that's something Avery has been struggling with as well. They really are, like, he's a very similar person to her. I want to see them be best friends and take over the world of finding together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that to expand on that theme, the running joke, I guess, throughout this chapter of Jude's family trying to set up Jude and Avery, or I mean, they don't even, I guess, respect Jude enough that they pretty quickly start offering higher tier candidates.
Yeah, that part was so bad when like Avery does express interest, and they're like, "Oh, it doesn't have to be Jude. We'll give you a different heir." And I was like, "Oh, fuck you guys!" Like, that's like It's so insulting to Jude. It's gross.
Yeah,
Like I don't like anything about this.
On one hand, I recognize that it's shitty for the people in this situation, but as a reader, it's very juicy.
And it's that weird sort of backhanded compliment where it's like this is their way of saying, oh, like, Avery, you're doing great, and it's like I get that you kind of mean well when you say this. Like when Walt towards the end of this is all like, oh, we need to polish up our eligibles. Like, what do you look for in a partner? Like, we need to get you in our family. It's like, oh, I get that you mean well with that question, but also gross.
Yeah. So yeah, there's I also think talking about these marriage propositions, there's a bit where the aunt is like, oh, it will wait till you're 25. There'll be a series of staggered commitments. Do you know what I'm talking about? And Avery's response is, I find it odd that you think I'm equipped to get this offer, but not smart enough to understand staggered commitments, which is just like a absolutely perfect on point indictment of the problems with practitioner society. I just loved it.
Yeah, she fucking destroys that whole idea, doesn't she? It's a great burn.
Yeah.
If Charles wasn't in the next chapter, it would be the burn of the week. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I like about the Garricks as a family. Like to touch on both these things we've just sort of been talking about. The Garricks are really fun for me because they feel like a really recoverable version of the practitioner family, and obviously they have a lot of these shitty tendencies, like the way they treat. They talk about their kids as being eligibles, and they talk about like marrying whoever off to Avery. And there's these other moments where like you kind of get the vibe that as much as they are a family, there is a certain amount of expendability in an individual Garrick, which ties into the whole Wondercand conversation, because those guys are obviously a lot worse for it. But like as much as the Garricks are problematic on some of these axes, they are a much nicer and fairer family than most. Like they do seem to care about each other a lot more than the Mosses or the Bellingers. Like this whole stuff about the girl who died of leukemia that they talk about later. Like I think as a family unit, they're much closer to being a good, healthy family than most other practitioners.
Yes, 100%.
And that makes sense, being finders and being like a fringe practice. It's just so fun because like as a family, I find myself so much more enraptured by them because it's like they're problematic but not irreversibly so. Like there's a handful more of these deals with Avery, and I can see her fixing the Garricks almost.
Yeah, totally. I mean, not to get ahead, but she kind of does start to do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there's such a fun way to explore like, with Mrs. grand plan for Avery and the Kenneteers as a whole, like in our minds, the Garricks are such an interesting and perfect kind of first foray into that because they're far from the worst type of like practitioner, but they're also kind of emblematic of the problems in the society as a whole. So it's like it's the perfect first enemy for Avery to conquer because they're not that hard, but there's also some serious changes that need to be made in the way these guys think about stuff.
Yeah.
And she's already making headway in that. But speaking of the worst that the practice has to offer, let's talk about Wondercand.
Yeah. What are you talking about the worst? They're a strong meritocracy that allows, upward progression for finders. I don't see what the problem is.
Yeah, it's so corporate. Like I love that. We're not going to have time to do a back to pact in this. I kind of want to, so we'll just say they do remind me of something we meet in Pact.
Yeah, 100%.
But like I love this because like what an awful fucking way to engage with finding. Like the cool thing about the paths is that they're this like otherversian wilderness. There's like the lack of structure. There's the adventure to it. Like obviously they're dangerous as fuck, but it's like the reason people do it, like isn't so much for the power as much as just like it's cool fucking shit. Like, and Wondercand have just removed that. They've systematized it to the point where it's corporate, and it's just like, I want the sequel to Pale to just be a story about Avery as Mrs. Ambassador, fucking working with the Garricks, doing the rest of the promenade stuff, fucking fighting Wondercand. Like that's a serial in and of itself. Like easy.
Yeah. Maybe they'll show up in a future. They do feel like the kind of thing that's set up in one story and then will pay off in a sequel or something a few stories down the line.
Yeah, like they just feel like such good villains, don't they? Like they're sort of everything that Pale is against, and but like the thing with Lost and fringy path shit as well is that they're going to be extremely unpredictable and yeah, like obviously I'm still very much reading the concept of finding and like finder practitioners as being like akin to daydreamers and inventors, and I love Wondercan then as kind of the representation of like the worst parts of Google or Samsung or these terrible companies that have like innovation factories where they stick like scientists and engineers together in a room and just make them invent stuff for the company. Like that's what Wondercand is to me. Is they take all these finders and these lost and they fucking put them in a corporate setting and like turn all of their cool shit into a product.
Mm.
And I just would love to read the story where they're the bad guys who get defeated.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the Garricks hang up the call to mull over this offer, and Avery takes this time to speak with her team a bit on their strategy here.
Yeah, and I just wanted to quickly take a moment to shout out Nicolette again. I think I mentioned this last week with like the conversation with Y and the angle she brought to that, but as Avery, Zed, and Brie all mentioned, she's very good in this negotiation. Like, Alexander taught her well, and she's just continuing to set herself up as like, hey, do you want somebody with a lot of the pros of Alexander but without the cons? Come to Nicolette Incorporated. She's all the same quality as Alexander, none of the moral ambiguity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's wonderful here. She does really well.
Yeah, she's got that same like love of bringing people together, but also she's not going to forswear you to get a bit of power.
I want to touch on this section though, where Miss warns Avery that the Garricks might betray her. Like it's this very interesting bit of because it doesn't feel like it goes deep enough or will be important enough to come up in this story, right? So it's maybe a future seed, but like even so, it doesn't feel. It struck me on my second read through how it felt. I didn't know what its motivation was, and in with the author's intention as well, but that stood out to me a bit. And so I was thinking about this. The thing that comes out of it is possibly an exploration of like Mrs. Paranoia, which is maybe starting to seed ideas of like what she will do, in desperation. I don't know, or how she will get to be in desperate situations. Yeah, I don't know. What was your read on this?
Yeah, so I almost focused less on that part of it and more on like the conversation it leads Miss and Avery to. Like basically what Miss sort of touches on here is her specialty is subversion and hiding. Like she is somebody who avoids conflict, and that has obviously worked for her is the point she makes. But I feel like the grander point it touches on that Avery skirts around but doesn't quite explicitly address is, so Mrs. whole plan here is that she wants practitioners who are front and center, brand ambassadors for being practitioners who aren't cunts.
Yeah.
And that's kind of going against everything that she's about in a way, because Miss is somebody who avoids the limelight and like is naturally overly cautious.
Yeah.
And that's obviously not a bad thing, but like to a certain extent, like she's going to have to let some of these decisions be in Avery and the other two's hands, because I think unintentionally what Miss is starting to realize is she will undermine her own plans because she's going to be too cautious, because that's what she is. Like it's this weird thing. She's come up with this plan that involves like the Kenneteers being very public role models,
public
and she's somebody who goes out of her way to avoid it. So, like I think this is her and Avery starting to have this moment of Miss isn't going to be in the position to pull Avery's strings for too much longer, because as Avery actually gets into the limelight, Avery's going to be in a position that Miss is just not equipped to help her with. So like Avery will have to start taking more of the reins as stuff like this keeps going on, because it's not where Miss can help her. Like Miss has created a situation that is beyond her skill set as part of her plan.
Yeah.
I think this is just the two of them starting to realize that and talk about it.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting. I don't know. We'll have to see. I've got my eye on Miss as we round it out towards the finale.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. Particularly with the way Charles is talking in the next chapter, I think it directly is setting up like ideological conflict between her and Charles in an interesting way.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree though. Like overall, it was sort of like if this was earlier in the story, I would think the whole like Miss killed a Garrick thing would be a bit of a Chekhov's gun. But like at this page, I'm like, I don't think we have time for that.
Yeah, definitely. There's no time for that to come back into it.
Also, sorry, it is worth pointing out. I did confirm as I was reading. The Garrick she killed is the guy we saw her kill in 5.d.
Ah,
So
nice.
if you're interested in how that all went down, like you can go and reread it. But I think Miss is exceptionally fair to the guy, where she's like, he panicked, and I kind of understand it, but it came down to him or me, and I chose me.
Yeah.
And I was like, I get it. I don't know that the Garricks would, but
yeah.
Sorry, I suppose that's the other thing it does. It does seed the idea in Avery's heads that the Garricks may not be the most reliable people to judge how dangerous a Lost is, because, if this guy made it about him versus Miss, I think Avery would classify Miss as an undangerous Lost, whereas the Garricks would perhaps, fairly in their own way, describe her as potentially dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we meet Clay Garrick, a new Garrick who Avery swears to secrecy before filling him in. And Clay advises his family, yes, it's worth 120 big ones, 120 clams. The bargaining for money and tools and books all begins.
Yeah, and we'll obviously get into that because it's a very fun segment of the chapter. But before we do, we have to get into this point where when she's doing this deal with Clay, Avery sets up an alternate fail state to being forsworn. Like basically adds into this bargain that
a penalty clause.
Yeah, if you fail, you could be forsworn, or you could just do this instead. And like I read this, and I was like, this is not a particularly big brain play. Like just having a failure clause is fairly standard in a lot of contracts. But it was still like, I was like, this is the first time we've seen this, isn't it? Like, just about. Like, why is this not more standard?
Yeah. I mean, it feels like it's a better... I don't know. I guess, so here's the thing. Is $180,000 worth more than the amount of power you would get
yeah.
from forswearing somebody?
I mean, I did actually think at one point, like, part of me was sort of thinking, I'm not 100% convinced that the Garricks might not just let him get forsworn rather than pay 180 Gs, which would be, that's a whole other angle to all of this and the morality of the practice. But just in general, the idea of having an alternative failure state of you could be forsworn or you could do X, Y, Z. I was just like, why is this not more of a standard? Why have we always seen this for the first time in 1.5 million words into this story? Like, this is a pretty easy out for so many circumstances.
Yeah. I'm just glad for Clay's sake that they do end up making the deal. Because can you imagine if they didn't end up making the deal and Clay just has to take this to his fucking grave?
Yeah, well, I mean, that would have been like really, because he would have essentially, I think, in that circumstance, Clay would just have to not be involved in any promenade research from that point on.
Yeah.
Which we established here probably would have taken a couple of years. So that's like, any system can be abused. You could abuse this system to take someone like Clay out of the picture. Like if Wondercand wanted to hamper them, this is a way to get someone out of the picture.
Yeah, true.
So like, obviously it's not perfect, but just like, I don't know. I just looked at this thing that Avery did here and everyone's calling it a curveball. And I was like, this isn't even that clever. This is really obvious in retrospect. Like, why is this not more common?
Yeah.
It almost feels like, I guess, practitioners are so used to forswearing technically only being one step away at any given time, that it's almost just a reality they don't question. As it's just like, it's rarer for someone like Avery to just pop up and be like, hey, should we not? It feels very in line with Miss's whole plan, the whole pushing the post along very slowly over hundreds of years. Like, I feel like constantly offering an alternative to forswearing in contracts would slightly weaken the concept.
Mm.
Because if an oath, like part of the power of forswearing comes from the fact that swearing an oath, breaking it means you get forsworn. If the idea of swearing an oath starts to be associated more with some sort of financial or other penalty, I think that would slowly whittle away at some of forswearing's power. Like, same as the other half of Mrs. Plan, right? Mrs. Plan with the Kennetees is like, in 100 years, we might have changed things a little bit. I feel like Avery's already starting to do the same thing with forswearing if she can make this common practice.
Yeah. This is fun. This is fun stuff. It's a fun chapter, and I know Warburg explicitly says that liking this means you're a little bit like Alexander, but I'll happily accept that. It was very fun.
Yeah, I mean, this was the part of Alexander I think we all universally agreed was the good thing about him. Like that part of Alexander that existed just to bring practitioners together and do cool shit was the part of him that I was like okay with. Like it was the rest of him that needed to die in a hole. But like, yeah, like that was the part of Alexander, like the Alexandry part of us that enjoys it. I think that is the one part of Alexander that I was okay with. So, yeah, as you said, I will happily sort of be alongside Nicolette and say this is cool shit.
Yeah, 100%.
It's also cool shit just because we learn so many. Like, there are so many little details and bits of world building put into this chapter about the paths. Like, we've obviously talked about Wondercand. Like, we're learning so much about the paths and shit that, like, it's crazy that we're getting that at this point in the story. But, like, all these little details that are hard to pull in this podcast, so I'll just, like, skim through them. But stuff like the cakewalk being a finder killer of a path was a hilarious joke. Learning about the concept of, like, finder families having uniforms. The bit where Zed and Nicolette are fucking obsessed with Avery getting hard copies of books that are bound and not photocopies, and Avery's just like, I don't give a shit. Like just little bits like that, and like hearing like Nicolette and Zed being like, no, when you're in your 20s and you're trying to make it as a practitioner, it'll be very important that you have a good bookshelf. And I was like, what are you guys talking about? Like,
I mean, I liked that they were on her team, but you're right. It felt over the top.
Yeah. And it's like Avery says, like, she's like, I feel like I'm being corrupted here. Like, it feels like one of those old school practicey things that, like, Zed and Nicolette have just been brought up in a little bit and aren't questioning enough. And
yeah,
Avery, and even the Garricks, like, our kids don't care if they're bound. And it's like, yeah, finders don't give a shit about that stuff. Like, I don't care. And I thought it was especially a little weird coming from Zed, like, Mr. fucking digital copies of everything. Like, Zed struck me as the sort of guy who fucking has everything, like, in like EPUBs that he downloaded from some sketchy source, not having hard copies of stuff.
Yeah.
I think the other big moment to talk about from this whole segment is obviously like Poppy's basket, like the young girl who died of leukemia.
Yeah.
Just because there's a little important moment captured in here, which is obviously throughout this negotiation, Avery's been playing hardball, and we already sort of touched on how that is like a big step from her and a bit of growth, that she's like learning when to be the person who doesn't just give away ground and try to be people's friends, but actually values herself and what she has appropriately. But obviously, like, you don't want her to swing too far the other way. Like, you don't want her to become a full-on wolf. And it's moments like this where you still see that she's still that good person and it's still Avery. Like, Nicolette kind of callously just lowballs them on these magical items and clearly upsets them. And Avery just, like, immediately concedes because she's like, these are magic items coming from, like, a dead girl's thing. Like, there's an emotional aspect to what they're giving up here. And
yeah.
Avery is still Avery enough to recognize that and chill out because of it. And I was like, okay, like, this is really good that as Avery is embracing that tougher, wolfier side of herself, she's also not losing who she is.
Yeah, she's wonderful. And it's nice that, she's getting more powerful, but not getting less empathetic, I suppose.
Also, $500 for a magical blow dryer just doesn't seem right to me.
I suppose it's way too cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess we'll get into this as we start talking a bit more about the bargaining going. But like some of these books go for $750 or whatever, and I was like, okay, magical textbooks I actually would have thought would go for more, but like, that's comparable to regular textbooks. Um, but yeah, just like these moments where it was like, yeah, they agree on like, yeah, $1,000 for like magical items. And I was like, God, no wonder Clem isn't rich. This shit is not worth as much as I would have expected. Like, maybe it's because I'm not a practitioner, but I'd probably pay like all of my money for a magical blow dryer.
But remember, Nicolette basically says it's effectively just a crossbow.
Yes.
You
It's
could
a
just
blow
go out
dryer
and
that works like a crossbow.
You could just go out and buy a crossbow. I bet you could buy.
I don't want a crossbow. I want a magical blow dryer.
Yeah, but I mean, once you've got past the fact that it is magic, the most exciting thing about it is that it is magic, not actually what it does, right? Like,
No, yeah, I guess it's just like, I guess that's just a testament to this world that like the magic has almost been sucked out of it. Like the fact that a magic blow dryer isn't worth that much money, kind of says a lot about like how magic is thought of and treated in the world.
yeah.
Because for me, yeah, just the fact that it's magic means it's worth at least 5 digits.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same. Like Avery kind of lowballs them on releasing the others. I know I am jumping ahead in the notes a bit, but like part of me was like, okay, it's actually kind of nice that Avery's lowballing the freedom of these others because by valuing it as lower, she gets more of them let free. So I was like, okay, like because at first I was like, you're only charging $1,000 to free another. Like, are you saying their freedom is only worth $1,000? But I was like, actually, if she lowballs it, more of them gets free. Like, I'm fine with devaluing it in this instance.
Yeah, 100%.
But like, again, it's saying a lot about the Garricks that for them, it's like, oh, $1,000 to free this other we've had in the closet for 60 years. Like, okay, yeah, sure. Like, yeah, that's saying a lot about them that, it's worth $1,000 to them to free someone they've had in prison for 60 years. It's not saying a good thing.
Yeah. So yeah, let's get into this, shall we? So yeah, Avery also requests in exchange for cash, others 4 with the number 4 cash is the scheme that she set up.
So to be fair, it's actually worth clarifying. Avery doesn't really bring this idea up. Miss does.
Yeah, true.
Which, because maybe it was just me, but I'd thought of this a bit earlier. Not exactly this, but I was like, they kept like the Garricks were sort of going through their list of shit they could offer her for money, and like pretty immediately I was like, surely they have like lost contacts that are worth, like they bring up their dramatis personae, which we obviously we saw those in Mile End as well, but like they were talking about other practitioners, and I was just sitting here thinking, don't they have lost they could offer? And I was just honestly just a little disappointed in Avery that it took Miss bringing it up for her to think of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of a weird one, like buying. I guess it's not that out of the realm of possibility. I didn't think of it until Miss brought it up.
I didn't lead straight to freeing bound others. Like in retrospect, I wish I had, but I did go much earlier than Avery to the idea of, do you have lost who we can work with? And I was surprised that the concept of interactions with lost coming from the Garricks didn't come up till Miss brought it up.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, and I mean, in saying that, it is really great as well because like there's a part of you that up until here is like, is Miss really getting her 50% of value from Avery getting all these resources? And I felt a lot better about that when Avery starts trading some of the money for like releasing Lost, because I was like, oh, that's something Miss will absolutely put a like mental premium on. Like that's worth so much to her because this is Avery doing everything Miss wants.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's just really nice. It's like a perfect. Obviously, part of Mrs. Plan is having Avery be so powerful demonstrates to people like the Garricks that there are other ways to do things. But like Avery is very explicitly starting them on the path of being more friendly with others so that they can more easily get useful and valuable information. I mean, like, clearly they do a bit of that already, of like talking to others that they encounter on the paths. So, hopefully Avery is a good example of, hey, you can really take that concept and run with it.
Yeah, well, it's also setting a really good tone for, if there's this new breed of practitioner, or I suppose, as Miss would say, the old breed of practitioner, is coming up and getting power, and, there's all these extra powerful practitioners, and something that's important to them, and a clear rule that they set in, which is treat others with respect. Like it's kind of fast forwarding a bit Miss's plan, because it
Yeah.
is, as the power shifts slowly towards these good wild practitioners, it puts even more pressure on the old dynasty families to also be better in how they interact with others, because otherwise they're making enemies of all these wild practitioners. Like it's Avery like drawing a very firm line in the sand in a very reasonable spot, basically saying, like, if you want to do business with me, this is how we're going to have to do things. And if this, like, yeah, if more of practitioners like this come up and start doing that, then like even the musses in the area will probably have to bend to some degree or get eliminated.
Yeah.
Probably the musses will probably have to get eliminated because that's their whole thing. But um, maybe more like the Bellingers or the Rad Rays are the ones who will have to start, not just binding others willy nilly.
Yeah. Yeah. Which will be nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, the bargaining is done for now. Avery regroups with the others, and together they start recruiting. They recruit freaking Squeak.
I'm sorry. Before we get to freaking Squeak,
No, we want freaking Squeak.
I have to talk about this moment where Avery actually tells the Garricks like what the info is.
Yes,
because they're just so happy and it's just so nice. Like,
yeah,
Avery has been killing herself to play the savvy businesswoman. It's not a role she relishes. And I think like Clay, I really want to give props to Clay because he absolutely tricked me with his whole like this isn't everything we expected routine. Like,
yeah, he was shrewd, wasn't he?
Yeah, like he's very good at this. His dad taught him well because there was definitely still a small part of me at this point in the chapter that was anxious that Walt was going to get mad at Clay and Avery and not think this was good enough. And so just like that rewarding moment where Walt just completely, he's been like the grumpy asshole this entire time, and he's just suddenly Mr. Friendly. Like he's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
you're great." And this is
Yeah.
where he does the really, kind of gross stuff about wanting to get her in the family, and when they find out how much more she's got. And it's just like, for me, this is like Avery's reward for putting on this persona that doesn't really come naturally to her, like playing the hard ass. They're clearly very like they're going to happily be her friend after this. And it's like, she'll still need to be businessy with them for a while, but like they clearly trust and want her on side so much more now after she's given them. This is already moving past that point of the relationship she hates. Like her reward is things have already moved so much closer to where she wants them to be, which is just being friends. And I just loved that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so nice. It's just so nice.
Yeah. Like it's just proving what Miss and Toadswall were saying, that if you put this work in now at the start, you can get to the place where you can be friends. And yeah, Avery's earning it here. Like just the turnaround in Walt is so good. I can't stress that enough. Just like he suddenly becomes like, yeah, Mr. Friendly after being an asshole for the whole. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, it is worth touching on this moment with Jude, or rather, a pair of moments with Jude, where both times Avery starts heading in the direction where it sounds like she might come out to his family. He shakes his head, and it's a little unclear.
We don't quite know what he means. What is implied by this? I think it would be a fair read to think that potentially some of the Garricks are homophobic.
Yeah, that was definitely an idea that like jumped into my head early on, but like I don't want that to be true because they're such like a lovable band of kooks. Like I don't tend to associate like kooky, like they're very off center. They're not like a regular normal family, and I guess I do tend to associate like that kind of energy with such conservative values.
But then they are also practitioners, and practitioner society is just inherently regressive, right?
Yeah, but they're not quite like this is coming back to why I love the Garricks. They're 1 foot in practitioner culture, 1 foot out, and I guess I'd hoped that part of that 1 foot out would be on some more of these social issues, but the idea that they're homophobic is definitely a valid read. I hope it was just Jude being selfish and wanting to like keep himself in the position of being Avery's go-to, because that is an understandable impulse, if a kind of shitty one.
Yeah.
Especially because, like, knowing Avery, like, that's going to be true for him regardless. Like, he's her friend in this family. As I keep saying, they're basically the same person. I think they're going to still be friends regardless. So I hope it's not that for him.
Yeah, I hope not. We'll see, I suppose.
Yeah. One last thing, and then we get to Freak and Squeak, I promise. Bree is in this whole chapter, but she doesn't really do anything except keep offering people food, which I just thought was funny.
Mm.
Like, given her relationship with food,
You're
it's
right,
just
that is funny.
her turning into the person who's just constantly like, "Hey, do you want to eat something?" I was just like, "Oh, Bree."
But so yeah, Freak and Squeak, they're wonderful. I mean, like, we're introduced to them of like seeing this small, female other and then this huge lumbering giant guy other, and you kind of have an expectation of, well, I know who's Freak and who's Squeak and
Yeah.
blah blah blah. And obviously it flips your expectations, and it's just, I mean, it's delightful. They're very goblin-esque in just how fun they are, even though you wouldn't really want to interact with them in real life.
Yeah, and that's a comparison Snowdrop makes pretty immediately, as well. Yeah, no, I agree. I couldn't believe I fell for the switcheroo that Walbo pulled there. Like, I instantly was like, oh, that must be Squeak, and that one's Freak, and they do this, and then it was the opposite, and I was like, of fucking course it is. Like, what am I doing? I will say though, like, yeah, Freak's abuse of Squeak is very much right on that line where I was kind of laughing, but like very uncomfortably. You know what I mean? Like, she's like abusing him. It's just like straight up physical abuse. And I was like, oh, am I meant to laugh at this? It's right on the line. Um, I think the comparison I made in my live read is those who listen to our pilot season. Do you remember Cain and Abel from Sandman?
Oh yes, yes I do.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was very the same vibe with them. Like, Cain was
yeah, hundred
constantly like
percent.
killing Abel, and I was like, this is funny, but also very upsetting.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where because it's in a fictional story, you can laugh at it, but you know
Yeah,
that it would be absolutely monstrous if it was real life. But then again,
yeah,
Freak and Squeak are one entity, so like explicitly in universe one entity. So
yeah.
again, I don't fucking know. It's really on the line, isn't it?
Well, I mean, actually, that point is worth sticking with because yeah, like Lucy sort of is like, oh, because yeah, it keeps happening, and Lucy's like, this is really not okay, and I was like, okay, thank God Lucy's here.
Yeah.
And then Avery's like, well, technically the book says they're one entity, so it's just self abuse, and Lucy's like, and that's
Great.
better.
Yeah, exactly.
um, but also like it's just worth pointing out, like as far as metaphors go, like especially that it's these two talking, like Avery has just spent this entire chapter balancing, the wolf and the deer inside of her.
Mm,
Is the nomenclature I'm just going to commit to at this point. Um, so this metaphor is fairly on the nose. Like she's just summoned this lost who is half, this powerful, aggressive asshole, and half this friendly but beaten down wimp, I guess. Like of course this is the lost that she just summoned, is somebody who is like, fighting this war in themselves between the person who's loud and aggressive and the person who is like nice but, gets abused.
mm,
Like in a way, Freak and Squeak is the opposite of who Avery was at the start of this story, where like
mm.
Freak seems to kind of have control of the dynamic in Freak and Squeak, whereas in Avery's head, Squeak was very much in control when we started this story, and now she's trying to figure out where Freak fits in. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Like this is a war, obviously. I think we all have in ourselves. Everyone has a Freak and a Squeak inside of them. But that journey has been particularly on the nose for Avery, and it's just like as a metaphor, I was like, of course, this is the lost she summons here to work with her. Like it had to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good thing to pull out. I like that.
I and I also want to call out Phoenica. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Phoenica.
Mm.
It's like Phoenix, but with an Ika at the end.
Yep.
Anyway, that's
Useful
a
description.
Reddit user who commented this on Reddit, a place I'm trying to now visit regularly. Um, and I completely missed this, but they pointed out, and I love it, which is Freak and Squeak instantly understand Snowdrop.
Mm.
Like the first thing she says to them is, "Oh, the goblins are going to hate them," and Squeak just immediately is like, "Yeah, fuck yeah, goblins love me." Um, and I agree with Fernica. That's a really really good detail that like Freak and Squeak just instantly see through Snowdrop's rule of discourse and like get along with her.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, they're just, I guess, because they're other lost. They're just kind of in the same ballpark.
It's just nice to get to see Snowdrop, like, considering her other best friend is Cherry, who still somehow doesn't fucking get it. Like, it is just nice to see Snowdrop like meet people she can instantly communicate with, and doesn't have to have the awkward like moment where they figure out her rule of discourse.
Yes, true. They're just kind of immediately, on Team Snow.
I'm also just hyped for like meeting Freak and Squeak, but also potentially more Lost. Like if the Garricks send any others, because this was just meeting wacky others that we kind of know some rules for, but don't quite understand. It's just extremely fun.
Yeah.
Like this reminded me of when we were reading the new other correspondence in Arc 8.
Meeting new others is always fun because you'll always get weird new tricks up their sleeves that you get to kind of explore.
Yeah, sure, but there are definitely like subtypes. Like if we meet a new goblin, they kind of have to be like some sort of really weird outlier for it to still have that same impact. Whereas like the great thing about Lost as a category is
it's a large bucket, isn't it? Yeah.
Like anything's on the cards.
Yeah.
So like Lost is a particularly great set to just start using at the end of this story because we have no ability to really predict what the limits are for them. Like everyone we've seen is incredibly diverse.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, next Avery decides with the gang to visit the Musses. Just Raquel and Y are there, and Avery attempts one more time to connect with Raquel, and it works. She gets through. Raquel is, at a low point after the broken and battered and stripped of all tools. Reed is still determined to be a more viable candidate than her. She's fair enough. She's not in a great spot after that.
We'll talk about more that as we get to like exactly how they do it. But it's worth calling out the visuals in this scene. Like as the Kenneteers are running to meet her, each of them like pulls out this spirit that sort of starts riding them. So like Rona's got legs, so she's fucking covered in like various legs. Avery has Dish above her, and like Lucy has one that's on fire that she sort of combos with herself to make this cool smoke effect. And it's just like, not only are those super perfect and fun choices for each Kenneteer, but like the visual of them running to this meeting, fucking being ridden by fire and legs and Dish, while these goblins all like cheer them into a clearing. It's just cool. And as they start to convert Raquel, there's this moment where all of them sort of crowd in on her. Like there's this really great, like visually, it's like there's been these two lines, and then the Kenneteers all sort of close in on her, and Y's coming up from behind, and it's just like the feeling of how they almost put the pressure on her in their positioning to help her crack is just like I love how Wildbow's writing makes it all so visual in your head.
Yeah, 100%. Very evocative. Hey, can we point about something? They're going through kind of flyers when they're talking to Raquel, and there's one that jumped out to me, described as a giant face with uneven teeth peering out of the trees, eyes wide, smiling like it didn't know how human faces smiled, which doesn't seem to match any of the Carmine contenders. I think the closest is the Wolf Daddy, but even
he's
that
listed separately.
Exactly, listed separately doesn't quite make sense. Who is this? We get one or two new ones that are mentioned as well. There's like a boogeyman. There's like some others. So this is possibly a new one, but I don't know. Is this a Marisica or a Charles or something either? Who knows?
Yeah, well, we did also get told by I think Y that some like low-level desperate practitioners will show up, which I suppose is arguably the camp that Charles falls into.
Very low-level, very desperate practitioner. Yeah.
But yeah, like that's the thing. I was like, could this be one of those? But that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Yeah, I mean it would track just for the world's Wildbow builds that like there will be a few contestants who will show up that we just don't really know anything about. Like for everything we know about what's happening in this world, Wildbow's got like another 10 things. is usually how it works. So yeah, I mean, because it's unclear. Something that gets brought up here is there are no spectators allowed at the fight, so we won't even get to see it unless we get some sort of interlude from someone there,
or unless one of the Kenneteers decides to enter the
True.
ring.
True. Them entering as a trio would certainly be a wild ass twist, but
God, now that you've said that, it makes me think it's gonna happen. I don't know how the fuck, but yeah.
But yeah, no, it would just make sense to me that there's going to be a few contestants that we don't really know anything about, and this will be one. Because yeah, like the only thing I could think was like a giant smile that's unhuman. I was like, is that the wolf? That feels big bad wolfy to me, but there's already a wolf in the competition, and I don't know how
Yeah,
the wolf
exactly.
would get involved in this.
Yeah, true. Maybe it is the wolf. Capital W.
I think I'm slowly coming to terms with the idea that like another visit to the promenade is not in the cards. Just in terms of, I still think maybe Avery will deal with the wolf, but like the flip side of something I've talked about since early Deep Impact of the thing I love about Wildbow's stories is he gets to sprawl and raise these issues and explore them in more diverse ways than like a very compressed story. The flip side of that is that sometimes you have to accept that like some of the threads aren't going to come back for the story.
Yeah.
Otherwise you end up like George R.R. Martin, and it's been 9 years since he published the book because he's sprawled out and he's still trying to balance all those threads.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's something I want to talk about from this showdown. The bit where the Kenneteers ascertain that Blunt Munch is almost certainly against them. How clever is that trick? It is wonderful.
It would have worked on me.
Yeah. It's so smart.
Yeah, it's a really good plan. The way they hype them up by like just doing general like goblin-y fucking war cry shit. Yeah, very smart. And Ram Jam is safe, so I can sleep easy at night.
Yep. That's quite nice, yeah. And then we get this nice kind of resolution with Raquel. It's not solved, but Raquel was clearly on the ledge before and has taken a few steps backwards and now is able to be reached, is within arm's reach, seemingly.
I think if I could borrow like Maricica's phrasing from the end of Break 1, I think they should just about do it. Like I agree that Raquel's not free yet, but like I think the snowball's rolling down the hill.
Yeah, true.
At the very least, I think they've now turned her into like what Clem and Nicolette were in the Blue Heron Institute arc, where it was like, Clem didn't leave Bristow till the very last minute, but it was the seeds they'd planted that meant that, she was in a position to kind of turn on Alexander and Bristow when she did. Same with Nicolette, like, the way they treated her was why she eventually left Alexander. And I will say like that was what I really enjoyed about this whole Raquel section was this felt like vintage Blue Heron Institute Kenneteers where they're fixing their problems just by being nice to people. And that's so alien to practitioner society that it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like so to talk about what exactly goes down with Raquel, I feel like the moment that this really comes together and is just like beautiful is as Avery sort of approaches her, she notes she caught a hint of exhaustion in Raquel's features, a hint of something Avery had come close to running into in the past. And it's like at that point you're like, oh, like Raquel is ready to explode. Like this is Avery remembering where she was just before the story started. And that like I love this moment so much because like this is also when Rabbit Killer just charges in and you're like, oh, Rabbit Killer saw it too. Like Raquel is ready to snap and the Kenneteers are exactly the people to help her do that. And I think Rabbit Killer attacks because he sees that that's what's going to happen. And like the way we hear it from her after Rabbit Killer has stopped is just like brutal because like it seems like the thing that's tipped her over the edge, like she's been stuck like this for so long, and the thing that's finally broken her is that the job she currently has guarding the cabin means that she actually has tons of spare time, and she's realized that she has fucking no one or no interests to spend it on. Like she talks about how she doesn't read books, she doesn't like TV, like she has time to herself, and what she's realized is that she doesn't really have a self. And yeah, basically the Kenneteers are able to. I mean, this sounds more uncharitable than I mean it, but they're basically able to take advantage of that by just offering to be her friend.
Yeah, take advantage of it in air quotes. What they really do is offer to be her friend. It's not taking advantage of.
I mean, yeah. I guess taking advantage of comes with negative connotations. I don't mean, but like, they're able to use it. That still feels. But yeah, like you know what I mean. Like basically, Raquel's breaking down. She's realized as Reed's been chosen, as she's got this spare time, that she doesn't have a self. She's existed solely for this family, and now that's going nowhere. It's like sort of finally dawning on her. And the Kenneteers are just like, hey, we're here. We will just be your friend, and it's like that's just all it takes.
Yeah, that's all it takes to break decades of practitioner society. It's just being friendly.
And it's like this is just exactly what they used to do at the Boy Heron Institute, and it was just great to see it again.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah.
Sorry, before we move on.
Yes.
I've got to call out this quote.
Okay, let's hear it.
So this is Verona saying this to Raquel, as Raquel is still trying to justify, sucking up to her uncle. Verona says this to Raquel, and I want everybody listening to think if they can think of somebody else Verona's advice here might apply to. I got the impression it doesn't matter, Verona said. If you do it all right, you get 3 nights out of 7 a week where he's shitty to you. If you screw it up, you get 5 or 6 or 7. But it doesn't change anything in the end. 3 nights or 7 still does a number on you. What you've got to do is change it up and get away.
I mean, it's pretty obvious that this also applies to Brett, right? Especially with the chapter we just saw. Does Verona realize this? Do you think she is aware or not? It's hard to. It's kind of hard to tell from the quote. But she says at the end, "What you got to do is change it up, get away," and that's like the opposite of what she is doing.
That's what that was. I was like, she has to know what she's doing here and has to realize how hypocritical that last sentence she just said is. Because holy shit, like, Verona, like, I love you, but you're an idiot. The only other thing here, like, Y is very blatantly just helping the Kenneteers in this segment. Like, specifically what I wanted to call out is, like, after Raquel sort of leaves, after they've got it, Y basically comes over and he's like, yeah, I reckon that should do it. Like, thanks for helping. I really needed that. And he's saying all of this in front of Muss's familiars. Like, the text is very clear that they're still there.
Yeah.
And Raquel brings up earlier that, like, she thinks she's boned anyway because of the conversation she had with the Kenneteers right then. The familiars will let him know, and so she's screwed. And I think, like, it's just worth calling out this moment with Y here because this is like a bit of a step up for how explicitly he's working against Mussa. Like, he's gone from going out of his way to sneak up and ask for help to just, like, in front of Mussa's familiars, going up to them being thanks for the help and helping them get to Raquel. And it's just like, well, I guess since Reed was chosen as a sacrificial lamb, according to Raquel, Y is out of fucks to give when it comes to Abe's bullshit. Like that's the I'm still desperately clinging to, Y will be redeemed, and I'm seeing this as a bit of a turning point for him. Like he's constantly said Reed is the reason he's here, and if Abe's really doing this to Reed, maybe Y's just fucking done.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you'd have to be, right? Like Reed is being sacrificed.
I mean, to be clear, that's technically, like, that is Raquel's Reed that Y sort of challenges, so I'm inclined to believe it, but it's not, like, set in stone. Does that make sense? Like, he's technically, it's not a guarantee that he's being sacrificed, but
it pretty much is.
Yeah. I mean, I still don't quite understand what Mussa gets out of doing that with him. Like, Raquel, talks it up to getting rid of the mistake, like not having to bring him back as a failure. But surely there's more to it than that. I don't know. I've been trying to get in Maricica's head too long. I'm expecting everything to have 5 layers of meaning.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, if there's let's say there's a 5% chance that Reed takes the throne and a 95% chance that he dies, Mussa, I reckon, would probably take that chance, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess. I don't know. I just feel like he has to be trying to get something else specifically out of having someone in there. I don't know. we'll see, I guess. But yeah, I feel like at this point we should probably just assume that Raquel was on the money, and he is gonna. Well, nobody's expecting him to win.
Yeah,
it's just like that's technically not confirmed.
Yeah. So yeah, finally the Kennedys have a chance to chat to Gashwad, who lets them in on some conspiracy stuff. Basically, he didn't want to do it and kind of just assumed they already knew about it, which is kind of hilarious. Anyway, Avery ends up calling Nicolette at the Blue Heron Institute, who reveals that something is going on.
Fuck, what a cliffhanger.
Yeah, I know, isn't it?
I was kind of glad Wildbow had mercy on us and made us only wait 2 days instead of 4, because I was stewing.
It was very hilarious to me that the countdown was wrong. Like that Wildbow put in this countdown, and we think, okay, this chapter we think we still have at least one more chapter of safeness before things really pop off. But no, things start to pop off immediately. Wildbow was just faking us out with a false sense of security before things really got hectic.
I think I expected some sort of popping off around here, but I did think we were going to get like this in our countdown was like the 2 days remaining.
Yeah.
And I kind of expected something like Break to occur in the last day, but then I did think the arc would kind of end there. Like I did think we were going to get our 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, maybe an interlude to round things out, and then we'd hit arc 14 with all the shit hitting the fan. So yeah, I was pleasantly caught off guard by just what at this point I'm guessing is like a sub arc.
Yeah, we don't quite know what it is, do we? It's not a bonus material because it's listed in the table of contents for regular chapters, but it's also not its own arc because it doesn't have its own arc number or anything. It's just listed as part of arc 13. So
yeah, for those who've read Ward, I'm likening it to Eclipse in my head. Maybe not in length. Like this may only be 3 chapters as opposed to like 10. I don't know. We'll see, I guess. But like, yeah, obviously this was on our minds because we had a very funny conversation with our Arc 13 reflecting guests who were like, "Wait, is this the end of Arc 13 or not?" We're like, "We don't know." So we think it's still part of Arc 13, but this is a bit of uncharted waters, which is fun.
Yeah. Well, should we get into it, I guess?
Just to touch on Gashwad again before we move on from 13.9, I loved how the reasoning for him not actually really signing on was like Avery brings up and kind of primes us for us, but like it's easy to forget because Gashwad's always been in the background. He's just a bit of a loner. Like he does his own thing. And it was like the reason he didn't really get embroiled in the way they expected is because he's smarter than people realize and he doesn't play well with others. Like he basically sort of says, yeah, Edith came up to me with this and it just smelled like fairy bullshit. And I just don't really want to work as part of a team. So I told him to fuck off. And it's great. It's particularly great because I was like, I got my hopes up and I was like, oh yeah, Gashwad isn't in it. So that's fine. Like now it's only Blunt and this is all good. Like we got one checked off. And then there's just the moment where he's like, I did obviously tell them all the stuff about the Blue Heron, like sort of before that. And that's like, you could see the gears click in Avery's head and you're like, oh, fuck. And then you get that cliffhanger, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Good stuff. Into Break.
Break 1.
Do we still do our musical intros for Break, or is that a summer break thing? How does that work?
I guess they're the same, but we just have to take all the word summer out
summer
every single time.
Yeah. Most of them are like summer songs is how I chose them.
Yeah. So now they're just going to be songs.
Yeah, sorry.
So yeah, Break 1. Raymond Sunshine is feeling his least radical, trying to figure out how to be a better person while reprimanding Macaulay Henniger.
Yeah, because with all the shit going on with Massa, I kind of forgot that this means that Ray is back to being acting headmaster.
Yes.
Which is not the best outcome.
Yeah. 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 I mean, this chapter is going to be exploring Ray and his character a lot, I guess.
Yeah.
I do like Ray a lot after this chapter. You do empathize with him a lot, don't you? He's he feels like his heart is in the right place to an extent, but he just has way too much authority and responsibility, and he knows it, and he can't do anything about it because he's also just better than a lot of the other way worse candidates that could be in his position.
Yeah, he's a bit of an embodiment of the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
He definitely reminds me of like obviously the two of us actually met living like in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Mm.
And just like a lot of the people you meet there, or the famous ones like Zuckerberg, are quite similar in that way. Like Zuckerberg was like a nerd who could write PHP, and now like he's in charge of decisions that affect billions of people and gets called to Congress.
Mm.
And it's just like, I don't know if he's had coaching or shit, but like like he wasn't somebody who you would have expected was like on the trajectory to be somebody who made political decisions, and I don't think that was ever his goal or intention. I'm not too familiar with him. I don't know, but like Elon Musk, any of these like household name tech innovators, like they're people who were like pretty good engineers that sort of through a series of circumstances have ended up with a lot of money and power, and that really I don't think for a lot of them was ever actually what they were about. And like Ray has a very similar vibe. Like
yeah, sure. I don't think I think I'm more empathetic towards Ray than I am towards, let's say, a Mark Zuckerberg type.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But
yeah.
I think I think Ray is in a much earlier stage than he's not. I guess in some ways he's playing on a global scale, but not in ways that we really are exposed to in this story, at least. We hear about his dragons, yes, but he seems to be doing okay with them, I suppose.
I suppose I just think it's like a worthy comparison, because I think like I do know other people who've had like little things like this, like a a little hobby project that they decided to host on a small website, and then before you know it, like it actually kind of takes off, and then suddenly, even though like something you thought was going to be like a hackathon thing, suddenly needs a DevOps guy to manage the hosting because you have 100,000 visitors a day, and all the money, you actually really have to start treating it like a business, or you're going to lose everything to tax. And it's like that process that like I've just seen engineers go through of like having something that you thought would be a fun project for an afternoon, and suddenly that becomes your life, is very like it's something that I guess I've seen happen in real life. And I thought that like the way it was captured with Ray, kind of doing that on steroids by having done it like 3 or 4 times, it just like really sold him as a character to me, and I could like really see it. And like but like in a way, he's different to the Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks because he's much more trapped there, and I think relative to them does have better intentions, although I guess I can't really speak to that.
I don't know.
Technically,
I think we can make that assumption based on what we know of Ray and what we know of a Musk, I guess.
Well, I think there's interesting. Maybe we'll get into it more as Charles makes his points. I think even with his good intentions, Ray has done a lot to solidify the existing power bases in a way he didn't necessarily intend to.
Yeah, in a way that wasn't consciously considered, but he is starting to comprehend, I think, now, finally.
Yeah, like it's like it's all coming down to intentions, I suppose. Like with someone like Elon, I would hesitate to assume he does that on accident in the same way Ray does.
Well, he's done it so many times that he must have had these thoughts. It would be irresponsible for him to have not, or inconceivable for him to have not made some of those,
I mean, that's
decisions
arguably
actively.
Ray, though. Ray's done it 3 times at least, right? Like,
yeah, I don't know.
But no, I agree with you. I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate, I guess. But yeah, yeah, no, like you're right. Like Ray is a lot more sympathetic than I am towards a lot of the big household tech mogul names, just because he's trapped in a way that I don't think they necessarily are.
Yes.
But yeah, and I mean, obviously, to pull back a bit, obviously we're here and he's talking with Macaulay. Macaulay, is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah, I suppose.
Should have checked that. It's been 12 months since we had to say her name. But yeah, like you sort of see it here. Like he has completely lost any trust in his own ability to act. Um, so like with Macaulay here, he's very hands off, and it's like even she realizes that that's not what she needs. But with all the Hector stuff in his past or whatever, he just and you know with every time he tries to help things, they seem to explode in his face. Like of course he keeps retreating like he does.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, yeah, I mean, Ray is learning. He's learning. He's going in the right direction. I think. I mean, like the biggest thing that I think he realizes, he is realizing, is the real strength of the BHI is in its ability to basically sneak a normal childhood into the life of young practitioners.
Yeah, or relatively, yeah, to help round them out because so many of them
Yes.
grow up in families that are so extreme. Um, yeah, like definitely, I went to a like boarding school in country Australia, so you know there were a lot of students who lived at the school who are coming from you know hundreds of kilometers away from anything, like very small families. Like you know they knew 30 people growing up. They don't even live in a town. It's like the farm and the people who work on the farm are the only people they know 90% of
Mm,
the time. And obviously, it's nowhere near as extreme as something like the Hennigers, but like that same core principle of, you know, like kids who are homeschooled in these farm environments just because the nearest school is up a couple hundred kilometers away would come. And like, you know, there's definitely a social angle that, you know, a lot of them would be missing when they first arrived because they've only known the people they've grown up with. It's like a very small group for so long. And the way a boarding school like that would round them out, I think, was absolutely super important. Like, I think they were the people who needed the school the most, and I
mm,
think Ray's spot on here.
mm. Yeah, yeah, 100%. Um,
Yeah, just that exposure. Like, I think you know, obviously having grown up in rural Australia, I think the reason rural places tend to be more conservative in general is because of the lack of exposure. Like,
yes.
um, for hopefully a bit more benign example for myself, I didn't meet somebody who I knew was a Muslim until I was 18, and I was so paranoid about offending them that I just kind of stood there silently and like was awkward as hell. And I'd like to think I'm better than that now, but it's like you know, it's just that lack of exposure, even for like well-meaning people, leads to stupid, intolerant behavior. And it's like,
Mm,
yeah, Ray's just right. Like, you need exposure to stuff like this.
mm. Yeah, I think we'll get into this a bit more when he talks to Maurice.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, Macaulay leaves Raymond to his thoughts and he defaults to obsessing over all of his problems and how there isn't enough time to solve them. We've already kind of touched on this, but yeah, what a terrible situation he is in.
Yeah, he's like drowning in problems.
Yeah.
Um, I almost want to go through his projects one by one and talk about them because they're all so fascinating. Like to start with, the Athenium arrangement. I think I've always just sort of naturally compared it to Wikipedia.
Mm,
But I don't like on thinking on it after reading this chapter. I don't think that's a fair comparison because it's a lot more commercial than that. Like
mm,
you need to apply to get access to it. You still need to reach out to like buy most of the non-free stuff. Like it's much more like the scientific journals in the academic world than Wikipedia, really.
mm.
Um,
I mean, I think WikiLeaks is maybe a decent comparison,
yeah, although like
although it's
WikiLeaks
not. You're
explicitly,
right.
yeah, like I'd kind of had it between WikiLeaks and Wikipedia, but no, I
Yeah.
think it's more like a scientific journal thing
Mm,
where yeah, they give some of it out for free, but like really you have to buy and prove that you are capable of using the rest of it. Like remember when
mm,
Verona was doing her alchemy stuff, the Athenium arrangement was requiring her to like meet a bunch of criteria to get access to most of it.
mm,
And the thing is, I'm not really going to fault that because this is dangerous info in the wrong hands. Um, I will question their criteria for deciding what the right hands are. But like
yeah.
it does remind me, like there are certain scientific journals to do with like microbiology and virology, where like you basically need to have certain qualifications to be allowed to access their articles because you know this is the sort of stuff where with the right equipment and the wrong know-how you could start like a biological war, like release a virus or something.
Mm,
So they do like protect that info, and I think the comparison between that and a lot of the practice info is pretty fair. I don't want just anyone to be able to suddenly, you know, fucking bind a bunch of others. But I do think that makes the Wikipedia comparison fall flat.
Yes, definitely.
And then obviously Gold Garden is very fun. So it's just like fucking Silk Road meets eBay for practitioners.
Yep. Yeah.
This is the one to me really reeks of like an engineer, a software engineer spending an afternoon building something they think is fun, and suddenly it takes off, and before you know it, they're like equipped with all this power that they don't know how to handle.
Yeah. And then should we talk about the black box, which is one that almost seems to, it doesn't seem to fit because it's something that is explicitly intended to be a force for good, right?
Well, it's a service. It's not
it's not a business
company.
Yeah. I guess in some ways an atonement by Ray of trying to take, the money that he's made from things that he thinks are tying him back and put into something that is positive. He mentions it costs him nearly $6,000 a day to keep Black Box up, which is fucking insane.
Yeah.
That's so insane.
It kind of shows how good his cuts from Gold Garden and the Athenium arrangement must be.
Yeah. This plus the fact that Avery sells all that stuff for like hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Garricks. Like, fuck. Practitioners, they must be so rich. They must just be so rich.
Yeah, although like the $120,000 was made out to be a very big deal for the Garricks. Like, we're talking.
Sure, that's multiple years of effort, I suppose.
Yeah, like that's the thing. I think if I got my extended family together and it was like, hey, none of you'll have to work, or we'll get this huge thing that we're all going to work towards for 2 years for 120 grand. We'd probably try to scrap it together. I don't know that we would, but we'd sure as hell try.
$120,000, should be pointed out, is 20 days of the Black Box network. 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think this following that whole negotiation really helps elevate Ray in your head. Like, in case you need the reminder that Ray is fucking global tier, he explicitly talks about it with like the Eastern practitioners he's dealing with. And then he as you say, he reminds us that he turns through what that whole previous chapter was about in 20 days on the Black Box.
Yep. Wowza.
Yeah, no, I really like your pull about how it feels like the Black Box is, like the charity that he runs on the side to feel good about himself. Like, at the very least, that one is, it costs him money, but he can always point at the Black Box and say, "I am helping." Because it's basically like Waze for practitioners.
Yeah.
But like, if you put the Black Box aside and look at the Athenian arrangement and the Gold Garden, it is worth pointing out that like both of those projects started with like I'd argue pretty noble goals, like good intentions. But like something like Facebook, once they sort of take off, all they're really doing is just changing the way the same powers have the same control of stuff. Like, it's made Ray rich, but like, has the Gold Garden actually changed anything except make it more convenient for people to do stuff? Like, it hasn't actually changed anything.
Yeah.
Like for everything, like for every person, it makes it more accessible. For every person, it gives access to a marketplace of like practitioner shit. It kind of sounds like he's also just put the power like back in the hands of the people who already had it.
Yes,
like they're the
100%.
ones controlling him.
It firms up the current establishment.
Yeah, same as something like Amazon or whatever. Like Amazon might kill like all those other small businesses, but all that really ends up doing is consolidating the power with the people who probably already had it.
Yeah. So yeah, Ray attempts to reach out to his network for assistance, but basically there is nobody willing or able to help.
Yep. This is a pretty rough point. The chapter till now has been building up that he has a million things weighing him down, and this next segment is basically dedicated to showing us that he has no one else he can lean on to help with it.
Yeah. It's rough. It's the only people that he can reach out to don't want to help him, and it's interesting. He reflects a lot on his assistants as reflections of who he was when he kind of brought up those assistants. And I think it's a nice sign then, I think, that Zed is so wonderful as he is, as like a representation of how Ray has grown and is possibly going in the right direction, I suppose.
Yeah. So like he specifically talks about how Judah represents kind of who he was when he took Judah on as an apprentice. Like as in Judah puts work above everything else in his life and always makes sure he's too busy, and that's what Ray was doing back then, and now he's still trapped there. And yeah, so it's interesting that like I guess Zed in that situation would kind of represent a Ray who is trying to find like himself again amongst all this and like get a life and happiness again. Like I hope that's what he sort of sees Zed as, and hopefully he manages to make that happen.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, hopefully. I don't know. So then this call with Maurice Crow really makes me wonder, like, I don't know, it kind of, this chapter in particular makes me reflect on the question of is it better for the Blue Heron Institute to exist or not for the practice in general? I don't know. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to the institution brought up in this chapter, isn't there? Like
Yeah.
Ray raises that super good point about, children like Macaulay needing the extra exposure and support.
Yes. Yeah.
But Maurice in particular brings up the fact that the school is filled with children from families that good people should have nothing to do with.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I'd say the Hennigers fall into that camp as well, which is just the really fun part of this riddle. It's interesting how Maurice won me over, and I was instantly like, "Oh, he's good people," because Ray is like, "Will you come and teach full time?" And Maurice's only question is under Musser, and I was like, "That is the correct question. The Crows continue to be good people. It's a shame that also means they say no to running this place."
Yeah.
I do hope he'd reconsider. He mentions not wanting to be the fourth because that's an unlucky number. I hope he reconsiders. We'll just get the Kenneteers to vet him. Just a 1-minute conversation with the Kenneteers, and they promise not to murder him, and then got it.
Yeah. Is there a version of the BHI that wouldn't in the current practitioner universe that would be stable and also a more of a positive force for good? Like, I don't know.
The interesting problem with that, and I'm speaking a little bit from experience here with that same school I mentioned, because they tried to change to a better culture after I had graduated. And what resulted after they did that was some of the families who have been sending children to that school for 5 or 6 generations started sending them to another one that's nearby that was not changing. So like the concern with something like the Blue Heron Institute is if you put someone like Maurice in charge and like properly fix it and try to teach the kids to be better, a lot of the families are just not going to send them there anymore if they think it's like corrupting the children with these newfangled beliefs that people should have rights. And they might set up a different one or whatever. Like that's a concern. Is like just fixing the Blue Heron Institute isn't going to fix the problem because the shitty families will just disengage. So we need to make sure we're doing it in a way that engaging is still better than not engaging.
Yeah. I don't know.
Which I think the shitty families probably outweigh the good families, so I'm not convinced that would happen with the Blue Heron.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's complex. It's complex questions.
Yeah. I'd love it if Maurice took over and the place turned better. I'm just pretty convinced that all the people who left would be the ones who need it and the ones who kind of give it the power and influence it has to actually be making a difference.
Yeah.
I want to call out this one part where, so when Maurice is basically kind of roasting Raymond a little bit, and Ray says, Ray says, would Louisa be willing? Do you think we need people with heart, with the right perspectives? And Maurice just says, then be that person, Raymond. And Ray says, I try, but apparently I'm bad at that. And Maurice just says, be better.
Mm-hmm.
And I just fuck. Speaking of interesting two-sided debates, like we're in Ray's head. We know he does want to be better, but he's really bad at it. And like the advice of just be better, it doesn't work for him. Like he'd love nothing more than to be
Yes,
better, but
he's trying, or somewhat trying.
yeah, but he's also stuck. Like between the being stuck and just being kind of shit at this, like he just that's not so easy for him, and it's kind of like callous of Maurice to be like that. But then at the same time, like
Mm.
Maurice is out, like Ray's trying to drag him back in. Um, Maurice is understandably a bit shitty with him for enabling Alexander and Mussa all these years. Like, this is the first of many arguments Ray will get into this chapter where I'm like, I see both sides and can't really fault either of them for where they're at right now.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think Ray does need some good, friendly, I guess ribbing is not the right word, but hard questions to encourage him to continue questioning things, I suppose.
Well, I mean, like, what's interesting is Ray, like, if we want to compare him to the Kenneteers for a bit, like, the problem is he doesn't have two other Kenneteers, right? Like,
Mm.
and this whole segment of the chapter that we've just been talking about is him basically running through the people he would love to confide in and rely on, and like the best he gets is that he forces some of the work on Judah.
Mm.
But like, yeah, what he doesn't like Ray obviously like in this chapter he's got the Lucy banner at the top, and I think that tracks really well for this like weight of the world he's got on his shoulders,
That's a good
and
point.
and also like he's unsure when to do stuff and when not to, which is obviously what Lucy's dealing with right now. But honestly, I think you could make just as good a case for him having like a bit of a Verona header, because he's getting a bit stuck, I suppose, and he's unsure where to go, and he is drowning so much in the present that he can't let himself really think about the future.
Mm.
And I think he's really interesting as this almost combination of Verona and Lucy, but without a Lucy, Verona, or Avery to lean on.
Mm.
And that's just what causes him to spiral. And yeah, like he wants to be better, but like I'm thinking about like Verona. Oh, like Verona's talked about. Oh, I'm not that good at recognizing when people are shitty. Like I think she's mentioned stuff like that at times, like with the race and stuff. But it's like having Lucy in her life has made her better at that, and now she is like better at calling people out on their bullshit. And Ray doesn't have that.
Mm.
Like Ray wants to be better, but he's lost trust in himself, and he doesn't have anyone to help point him in the right direction.
Yeah. 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 Here's a potential candidate. Ray leaves his office and runs across Nicolette and some other person, I guess.
Forgettable.
I don't even remember who it is. Whoever they were, though, didn't care for them.
Yeah, I just remember I don't like him. Yeah, I mean, Seth in this segment is kind of shitty, but very understandably so. Like, I really like this section with Seth, not just because it obviously sets up the shitstorm that's about to unfurl, but it's like a really handy reminder as we lead into Charles of like what being forsworn is before you've done the dumb shit on top of it. Like obviously, like we hate Charles a lot for the shit he's done recently, or with the Hungry Choir and everything. And I think Seth is like great as a comparison point before we reach Charles of just reminding us like what Charles was like when he made those decisions, like why he was that angry and that upset and did those stupid things.
Yeah, I mean, Seth is a lot more at this point in the story easy to empathize with than Charles. But like, yeah, the through line to pay attention to, I think, is like the desperation to have agency again over their life. We have obviously seen that a lot with Charles, and in hindsight, it's kind of obvious that we should have maybe expected it a bit more actively from Seth too. I didn't expect him to be so actively malicious, but I can't fully blame him.
Yeah, because like there's this one moment where Nicolette has a bit of a like OG Nicolette moment, so basically they're trying to figure out what to do with Seth, and Ray's like, oh, maybe we could like, set you up as a tutor or teacher of some kind. And Seth's basically like, that's my worst nightmare. I hated school and I'd have no friends, like no prospects. Everyone would still hate me and I'd be forced to interact with them. And Nicolette's sort of like, hey, a lot of that can change if you just try. Like, this is a lot better than what 99% of Forsworn get. For a lot of them, it's the universe torturing them to death. And Seth sort of just responds, thanks then, I guess. And I feel like this was a really important moment because, like, Nicolette's line about, oh, if you just put in effort, this is better than most of them get, like, reeked of all that stuff of like it felt like someone telling an ex-con that they should be grateful that they get like a shitty minimum wage job. Like, oh, well, some ex-cons couldn't even get a job. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
I mean, being lucky by Forsworn standards doesn't mean Charles is lucky. It doesn't mean he should appreciate what he has. Like,
Yeah.
the situation he's in is fucked up regardless of the context, and he's rightfully pissed off about it. And yeah, I just love this as a lead into dealing with Charles, because I love getting these reminders from Seth of like, even a lucky Forsworn person like Charles and Seth has still been given the shittiest deal, and they're understandably pissed at the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very understandable, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't excuse what Charles is doing or Seth, but it is understandable, I think.
See, I don't know. I still, I mean, I guess I've had this argument in the episodes and on Discord a bunch now. I still don't really hold Charles very responsible for most of what has happened with him. Because I feel like the more blame you lay on Charles, the more you're letting the system off scot-free.
How much blame would you lay at Ray's feet?
For like where Charles is now.
Yeah, not for where Charles is. I mean for, perpetuating the systems that exist. Because in my mind, Charles is doing what Ray has done accidentally and is trying to minimize intentionally, and with no care for the people that it's hurting.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
That's the thing that, like, I understand Charles's desperation, but, as Raymond says in this very chapter, Charles has caused the death of hundreds of innocent people is the number that I think Ray says. That maybe felt a little high to me, but still.
Yeah, I keep wanting to push back on that because to me, blaming Charles for the Hungry Choir deaths is just extremely unfair.
Is it?
Yeah, like he didn't set out to make that. Like he set out to make something that was going to kill a handful of people, and obviously that's not great. Like, I'm not trying to defend that, but I seeing people like Ray or anyone else say stuff like he is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of people rings so false to me, because like that's the Carmine's fault more than anyone. Like to say, like, Charles set out to do something stupid, someone else took it, twisted it, killed hundreds of people with it, and it's so unfair to then still say that he's responsible for it.
I disagree with that. I think Charles's thoughts on what the ideal version of the Hungry Choir could have been would have killed, 10-ish people, right? Let's say.
Sure.
That's Charles's idealized version of what would have happened with it. And it's just like, we don't really know what the cheating choir or whatever would have really, what it would have done. Like, it could have been something that kept killing practitioners for tens of years, right?
No, I'm sort of assuming that the vision Lucy had of it in 13.2 is more or less accurate, and that Alexander would have actually solved it. It killed like 5 or 6 people on the way. But I feel like that was the future we were meant to understand as what would have happened.
Sure.
If he'd been able to get away with it.
Yeah. I suppose that's fair. But then, what might have been the impacts of that, right? Like, Ray.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that Lucy talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Alexander gets the power of it. Like, it, like Charles. I don't know.
No, but like, no, I get that. But so, like, then the sort of next step of that is like, I fail to hold Charles too accountable for the very shitty things he did after being forsworn, just because I think it's very understandable that he did something like that after getting forsworn. Like, I
think it is understandable, but I don't think that absolves him of responsibility. Like, what he did was effectively create a Pandora's box and then effectively say, well, I just wanted to open it to do this one thing, and if it did other things, that I didn't know about it, so whatever. Like, that's so I don't know, like, short-sighted, you know?
Yeah, but like in his situation, like I just can't fault him for being okay with doing that. Like, that doesn't mean he shouldn't be stopped. Like, to be clear, because of the fact I don't really hold him accountable, I think he was, like, super wrong in what he's trying to do. Doesn't mean that, like, I wouldn't, like, shoot him to stop him from being able to do it. Like, I think that, like, big picture, what he was doing was wrong and needs to be stopped. But, like, it just feels counterproductive to me to, like, hate Charles for what he did, just because the situation he did it in was essentially like a form of duress that was, like, so severe that I just, like, I don't I don't have room to, like, hate him for it, because I'm too busy hating the situation that put him there. Like, I would much rather focus my efforts on Alexander, the system as a whole. Like, Charles needs to be stopped to the point where he's not actively doing any more harm, but, like, I don't think he deserves any judgment or punishment for what he did in those circumstances. Like, I would happily defend him as, like, in that situation, with access to those tools, I think a lot of people would probably still do something similar. Like, I think it's easy to underestimate how angry and lost you'd be when you get forsworn.
I don't know. Like, I don't know. The other factor to this is, how long has it been since Hungry Choir was created? And Charles, intentionally chose to not do anything about it, right? Like,
yeah, but, like, again, and he makes this argument in the chapter. Like, he does talk about this. His logic is, like, this is a messy way to do it. It's not ideal, but he's been put in a situation where ideal is out of reach. He's gone the full Verona. He's basically decided this will work. This will topple the system and hurt the people who hurt me. And, like, so he's decided to follow it through. Yeah, that makes staying quiet on the choir, because he needed them for the plan to work. But, like, like, again, if I was in his shoes, I think the only sane reaction to his circumstance of, like, first getting forsworn, then seeing what the Carmine did to the Hungry Choir, I think in that situation, the only sane response is to decide that a bloody revolution makes sense. Because, like, our alternative plan at this point is, like, Mrs., which is, like, if you go to Charles and tell Miss, hey, if you go to Charles and tell Mrs. Plan, it's like, hey, look, couple 100 years, we'll move the goalpost a little bit. Ray's very understandably going to tell you to go die in a hole, because, like, over those hundreds of years, him and people like him are going to suffer and die.
Yeah, but Charles's plan pretty much explicitly causes more collateral damage, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah, but, like, he I don't want to say rightfully, but, like, from his perspective, very, like, validly, doesn't give a shit, because, like, a lot of blood now to hopefully, like, change things in a fundamental way and take the power away from those who don't deserve it is worth it to him. And even assuming that there's the high chance that we all agree is going to happen, that it will just be replaced by more people who are essentially the same.
Yeah.
Like, I don't, like, even if there's even a 1% chance that's not how it goes, in Charles's shoes, I think it's reasonable to still push for it anyway, because that 1% chance of things getting better is worth all the bloodshed to someone like him. Like, I think that's an absolutely reasonable opinion to have in his perspective. And that's why I don't hold it against him, because I think it's reasonable in his situation. And so the problem isn't him, the problem's the situation he was put in. And that's why I don't blame him.
I think they're both the problem, to be honest, Elliot. But I sense there's just a fundamental disagreement there.
Yeah. No, yeah, I don't understand the perspective of holding it against him.
I understand Charles, but he's making the wrong decision. that like, he just is. I don't know.
No, I mean, yeah, like, I agree. Like, as I said, in this chapter, like, if you put me in Ray's shoes towards the end, I would probably have made the call to cut Charles in half or whatever. Like, he does need to be stopped. But like that doesn't mean I hold him accountable for the things he's doing along the way.
Like, I see Charles as very similar to Bristow in some ways, of like Bristow and Charles both have thoughts about systems that they think, oh, trust me, my system's going to be so much better. You know, if I have my way, it may not be pretty to get us there, but it's going to get us to a place that is better in the end. And it's just arrogant to think that that's, I don't know.
I would actually disagree. I don't necessarily even know if Charles is thinking far enough ahead to things could be better. I think he's just
But that's even worse then. Like, isn't it?
No, yeah, it absolutely is. But it's just like, the thing is, the status quo is so bad that like just tipping it on its head is better than letting it go on, like from his perspective. And like, I think that's the only sane reaction from his position.
Well, let's move on. I think I disagree, but you know, we could go around in circles and for ages. I think.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'm just putting myself in those shoes, and I don't know that I'd feel any differently. Like it would be that. Like he's like.
You're right that I have the luxury of not being in Charles's shoes.
No, that's like I'd stop him now because I'm sort of closer, to maybe the Kenneteers or something, right? Like I want to change things in a good way, but like in Charles's shoes, like he just needs to know that change is going to happen, and yeah.
So this is basically the stuff that Ray and Charles are speaking about.
Yeah. So we're like having to skim over our notes because that argument has sort of covered bits and pieces.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, we're talking about what Ray has just gone to speak to Charles, and Charles has effectively lambasted him over the fact that he has allowed this situation to persist and cause things like Seth as a evolution of Charles, a repetition of Charles's situation, right?
And I mean, like, what I love about this whole conversation is I found myself nodding along with both of them.
Yeah,
like, I love a moral disagreement like this where I'm totally on board with what both of them are saying. Like, Charles is absolutely right that Ray did nothing in the 10 years between him and Seth, and that he should hold himself accountable to that to some degree. But like, yeah, obviously Ray is right that Charles doing the shit he's done is not okay and needed to be stopped.
Yeah. Yeah, like Ray's defense is, removing Alex would have collapsed this house of cards. And I think he's a few steps away from fully internalizing the realization that, like, Ray allowed Alex to do what he did, and it was fruitless because Alex has been removed. And that house of cards is, in danger of, like, it's collapsing, Ray. So, all you did was buy yourself 10 years of time. Will that have helped? I don't know. I mean, the Kenneteers would have only been 10 years ago, so maybe you will have bought enough time to save the day, but I don't think you can take credit for that, Ray.
Yeah. No, exactly. Like, I think that's a super valid criticism of Ray's argument. I'm pretty sure Charles makes it. I had to stop myself from pulling out most of Charles's lines in this.
Yeah.
Like, Charles is holding nothing back, and his lines are biting, and it was incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like I tend to agree. I mean, this is what happens to people like Ray who find themselves enmeshed in the system like that, is you then have to start letting those little evils go, and before you know it, they're not so little evils, but like you're inherently tied into the rest of the practitioner economy, and it would be sacrificing yourself to minorly hurt them to stop them from doing something. Like it's like as we sort of touched on, like Ray's companies here, they improve things, but they don't change them. Like is the distinction I'd make. And obviously, like in this argument with Charles, Ray's almost a bit of a stand-in for the judges. Like Charles is pointing at Ray a lot of the same shit he would point at the Carmine, which is like, you have all this power, but it would cost you to use it, so you don't, and in doing so you are enabling the status quo. And yeah, like I love how Ray also just neatly slots into the judge's position for this argument with Ray to sort of justify Charles's anger and position.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. to touch on a lighter moment, there's a bit early in the conversation where Ray says, "I don't want to make you spill your coffee," and then later makes Charles spill his coffee, and it just made me laugh. Just a very silly little thing in this chapter, which made me giggle.
Yeah, I didn't actually notice that. I'm really glad you pulled that out.
Oh, you didn't notice that? I thought it was hilarious. Anyway, so yeah, tensions with Charles mount and then suddenly shenanigans begin. Something is attacking the school in a really sneaky way. Who's it going to be? Obviously, the answer is Marissa.
It's worth calling out, like, just how, like, because this is great, because obviously, yeah, Charles starts, like, really going aggressive on Ray, and then Ray's phone starts ringing.
Yeah.
And obviously, like this chapter is having fun with the dramatic irony there, because we know what's about to happen. Like, we know the shit's about to hit the fan from the last chapter.
Yeah.
And, like, this is just such a great moment of, like, Ray starting to get a bit overwhelmed by Charles, and then his phone's ringing, and Charles is like, "Pick up the phone, Raymond." And it's like, oh, the Hannibal Lecter bullshit's about to begin. Yeah, and I mean, another reason I really, really love this chapter is it was just great seeing a bunch of these old, like, tertiary characters who we haven't seen since we left Blue Heron. Like just these minor ones, like Eloise, Ulysses, Estrella. Like we've heard from and about people like Nicolette and Ray pretty consistently.
Yes.
But it was really nice seeing these characters who I thought we probably weren't going to get to see again.
Yeah, good to get a little bit more of them. Hey, this is probably the last time we're going to see some of them, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe some Blue Heron people will be really mad about what just happened and come to Gannett to help.
Come to Gannett to fuck with Charles. Yeah.
Like, specifically, I love when Estrella is almost sort of reintroduced, where Nicolette's on the phone to Avery, and it's that phone call that we had at the end of the last chapter. And Nicolette says, "He's secure, though. Do you think Edith passed on information about the Blue Heron to that fairy you're worried about?" And Estrella just whispers, "Oh, that's going to be a thing." And I was just like, "Oh, Estrella, like, I really want to hate you because you seem like a really bad person, but fuck, she's fun whenever she's on screen." Like, that is just such an appropriate reaction from a master fairy practitioner.
Yeah, she's very fun. Hey, can I touch on this bit? There's a bit where just suddenly Estrella tears Seth in half. And like the chapter has mounting tension throughout this whole thing. But this is the part where it really kicks up a notch, right? Estrella lunges at Seth, and then the next line is, "Then she tore him in half." And I'm reading that, I was just like, what the fuck? It's just like such a wild sentence to come across. And obviously it kind of makes sense. He was a fey stick creature or whatever, but like, oh my god, such a fun line.
When I had only read that sentence, my brain was like, is Estrella the doppelganger? Like, because she's the one tearing people in half. It seems like she's the baddie, and then you hear about the twigs, and it's like, oh, okay.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, no, I just thought that was wonderful.
Yeah. No. I think the thing about this chapter is, like, from this point, like when Ray answers that phone, and we realize that the game is afoot, the chapter just kind of unashamedly launches like into 100 miles per hour.
Yeah.
In this really fun way, because it's like we've been hearing about fairy plots since like Arc 1 or Arc 2. And we've seen bits and bobs of them, but like this is really the first time we're seeing a grand, important part of a fairy scheme come together. And it's like from the perspective of like, what, 2 dozen very powerful and influential practitioners. And it just makes this whole like show don't tell of fairy manipulations hit really fucking hard, because like these guys are all powerful. They've all got plenty of tools, and Marissa just dances circles around them. Like it's epic as hell. And it's like, I feel like we keep saying this, but this story is absolutely delivering on like a year and a half of hype and build up.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I love about this chapter is the shadow of Marissa is so large in it, but she is only here for the briefest moment. She doesn't arrive until the very, very end. And every time Ray turns the corner, I'm like, oh shit, where's Marissa? Like, is this Marissa? Or like, oh, Seth's in the courtyard. Is that Marissa? Like every moment, and it's until the very end. Like the the restraint Wildbow shows in this chapter by only having Mariska show up right at the very end and just for this kind of briefest of interactions before disappearing again is so fucking juicy.
Yeah, like it really needs to be said that just like obviously for Mariska to be able to pull off this shit in the story, that means Wildbow also had to be able to come up with this shit to write it, right? Like
Yeah.
so like
Yeah.
it just like to spend a year and a half telling us how fucking clever and tricksy the fairies are and then deliver on it so strongly, like it can't be understated just how like just impressed by that I am with like yeah to actually be able to deliver on that promise and like take me on the ride that this chapter was where we're watching all these powerful practitioners dance in circles trying to figure out the fuck is happening. Like that's so cool and fun and impressive.
Yeah, it is.
Uh,
It's wonderful.
like obviously we run around. It's worth pointing out Durachet because you get all these things that you think are fucking solid. Like Durachet is like, I have my monster pet guarding the perimeter, and it's like part of you's like, well, then nothing's getting through the perimeter. Like, what are you talking about? There's even a great moment where the Kenneteers show up, having clearly run through the ruins, and I love that because it's like, sorry, that was a waste of time, you three.
Yeah, they show up just too late to really help, huh?
And they've been like the last few days, all three of them have been so worried about like how much time they have to do things.
Yeah.
They've presumably just spent a couple of hours making it to the BHI. Now they're going to have to make it back, and it was pointless.
Why couldn't they have just shown up on the other side of the school? Then they would have been near where Charles was escaping. They picked the wrong end of the school to show up at.
Oh, but they did get to high five Durachet's monster.
Yeah,
so that's something,
I suppose. So yeah, Ray and the gang rush to get a handle on what's happening. Charles has been broken out by Seth, and they're escaping the school. And like, I know this isn't a good lesson to take from all this, but if anything, this demonstrates that Ray was too lenient on Charles and too kind to Seth. They should have both just been. Charles needed to be judiciously executed. I don't believe that, but God, Charles and Seth, like, Ray's trying to be nice to you, as nice as he can be in this situation. I dislike this.
Yeah, I mean, again, like Seth's actions in this chapter, like to me, sit in that same camp as the stuff with Charles. Like, yeah, he was stupid, and like I would stop him in this situation given the chance, but I can't fault them for acting like that in their situation.
What was Seth hoping to get out of this?
He just wanted to enable Charles to be able to do something. Like, I think Seth's just pretty much probably immediately on board with everything Charles is about. Like, they probably only took a note from Mariska to be like, hey, we're trying to violently topple the system, you want in? And he was probably like, okay.
Yeah.
Like he sort of says that, it was like he uses this glass thing and it's like lucky it didn't kill him.
Yeah.
And Ray's like, yeah, it's lucky it didn't kill you. And he's like, it was worth the chance to me. Like, I think that just that line sort of captures this mentality that you put the Forsworn in by forswearing them. Like, it's worth the damage and it's worth the risk for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that being said, like if I was in Ray's shoes and was in the mental state to be able to handle doing it, I think killing them was arguably the right thing to do to stop this. I would just then go on to blame their deaths on Alexander.
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, Ray confronts Charles and Seth and attempts to prevent their escape without killing them, but is shenaniganized by Mariska.
Yeah, and I had promised myself till this point I wouldn't pull out any of Charles's lines just because I wanted to pull all of them, but I've had to pull out this last one, just because Ray challenges Charles, and Charles just says to him, "How's this for reality then? I was by Hector's bedside when you weren't. I went. I spent the time there. I wasn't even much of a friend to him. I barely knew him aside from some jobs, but I did at least that much when you couldn't. You utter fucking coward of a man." And what I love about this line in particular is this is the one where I'm like, this could be a lie. Like, Charles could 100% be making that up, and it doesn't even matter. Like, even if Ray believed that he made that up, it's still going to hit us hard because that's like this is the biggest failure of Ray's. Like, I just love that. Like, if Charles is attempting to fucking destroy Ray mentally, like, perfect. Like, holy shit.
Yeah, it's pretty rough, isn't it? Yeah. Marisica is so scary. Seeing this, I mean, like I think we've touched on this before, but like the fact that she is a literal in-story kind of Machiavellian Joker-esque supervillain is just so wonderful. Like it's such a masterstroke of planning, and everyone played their part to perfection, and it's just so fun. Like these characters, these types of villains get a lot of flack because they feel unrealistic in a lot of stories, but because of the fact that she's a fae, it just feels so perfect, and it's just so fun to read.
Yeah, like a good Moriarty style plotting villain
Yeah.
is the best kind of villain, but fuck, they're hard to do, right?
Yeah.
And Marisica is delivering so well so far. I think it's like as well the little details. Like thing about Fairy, right, is she doesn't come and like club him on the head. She fucking is like floating around and like gently touching him in ways that blind him and steer him in a way he's not quite sure. Like it's all so like that captures the Fey energy so well. She doesn't shove him. She just like slowly twirls him a bit, so he
Closes
gets
his eyes,
disoriented.
twirls him a bit, taps him on the shoulder. Yeah.
Oh, like it's like she's air bending around him, right? She doesn't fucking throw a rock at him. She's like dancing around him, and that's just like I think that's the aspect of it that makes it work so well. Is like the fairy as a core part of their being are doing this dance around you, and that's why it works.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the end of the chapters for this week. The 3 chapters. Ooh. Long one. This is going to be a long one. Maybe our longest.
I mean, so as I was saying, it's like I think the average number of words for each of these chapters was like 13,000, which is that's 2 packed chapters per one, and like they're all so good and dense too. Like it's not that it's like, oh, it's just a lot of words. It's also there's so much packed into this.
Good words, yeah.
The problem with covering this story at this point is it's just like there's so many words and they're all very good and worth covering.
Yeah. Yeah. As a reminder, we are still running a discussion question. We'll be getting to the answer to that next week. That
Thank
discussion.
God.
Yeah, I know, man. Imagine us today would be going for another 45. The answers to that discussion question is: as we head into the finale, which Kennetia feels like they're doing the worst at dealing with their issues, and who feels like they're doing the best?
I definitely have opinions after these last few chapters, so I'm interested to see people give different ones.
Yeah, for sure. You can leave your answers to that discussion question in our discussion thread, which you'll find linked in the show notes down in the episode text stuff, depending on your podcast player.
Yes. Don't forget we're also have Pale Predictor open. Things have slowed down there a bit, which is why we're not pulling out predictions. But I guess that's understandable because we are running out of mysteries to solve. But if you have a prediction, get it in there. We will, of course, be talking about all of those in All Packed Up too.
Yeah. Yeah. And hey, why not support the rest of the shows on the Doof Media Network? We already mentioned Our Mum Critiques Wildbow, which is a spin-off show, I guess, a sub-show. What do you call it?
Yeah, I just call it, it's almost just a separate show at this point. It's basically the premiere Pale analysis podcast, where Jenny and Malia's mum is making her way through the story, and it's very fun. I've been meaning to pitch this in the Doof admin channel, but we need to get Jenny, Malia's mum, and Elise on a show together. It won't be on topic, but it'll be a very fun show.
Yeah. Yes. That's a wonderful idea.
But yeah, so Our Mum Critiques Wildbow. If you can listen to this, then you can listen to that, and I definitely recommend it. It's very fun.
Yes, it's wonderful. You can, of course, check out doofmedia.com for all of the great shows on the Doof Media Network. Or if you want to support the network, you can go to patreon.com/doofmedia. Find out about all the perks for supporting there. You'll get all kinds of bonus content and miscellaneous perks depending on the tier that you support the network at.
Yep. Don't forget to stop by our Wildbow's Patreon, patreon.com/Wildbow. He wrote us 42,000 words this week. Give him some money for it.
Yeah, definitely.
And with that, we'll see you all next week for Break.
Yeah, I don't know. Break 2?
More Break?
Maybe back to, 13.10, is it? Yeah, 13.10. Who knows?
I mean, it wouldn't... yeah, I'm not going to try to pretend I know what's going on.
See you then.